Letter 113 of Letters of John Keats to his family and friends. Edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nemo. To Fanny Keats, Winchester, August 28, 1819. My dear Fanny, you must forgive me for suffering so long a space to elapse between the dates of my letters. It is more than a fortnight since I left Shanklin, chiefly for the purpose of being near a tolerable library, which after all is not to be found in this place. However, we like it very much. It is the pleasantest town I ever was in, and has the most recommendations of any. There is a fine cathedral which to me is always a source of amusement, part of it built 1400 years ago, and the more modern by a magnificent man you may have read of in our history, called William of Wykeham. The whole town is beautifully wooded. From the hill at the eastern extremity you see a prospect of streets and old buildings mixed up with trees. Then there are the most beautiful streams about I ever saw, full of trout. There is the foundation of St. Croix about half a mile in the fields, a charity greatly abused. We have a collegiate school, a Roman Catholic school, a chapel ditto, and a nunnery. And what improves it all is, the fashionable inhabitants are all gone to Southampton. We are quiet, except a fiddle that now and then goes like a gimlet through my ears, our landlady's son not being quite a proficient. I have still been hard at work, having completed a tragedy I think I spoke of to you. But there I fear all my labor will be thrown away for the present, as I hear Mr. Kean is going to America. For all I can guess, I shall remain here till the middle of October, when Mr. Brawne will return to his house at Hampstead, whither I shall return with him. I some time since sent the letter I told you I had received from George to Haslam, with a request to let you and Mrs. Wiley see it. He sent it back to me for very insufficient reasons without doing so, and I was so irritated by it that I would not send it travelling about by the post any more. Besides, the postage is very expensive. I know Mrs. Wiley will think this is a great neglect. I'm sorry to say my temper gets the better of me. I will not send it again. Some correspondence I have had with Mr. Abbey about George's affairs, and I must confess he has behaved very kindly to me as far as the wording of his letter went. Have you heard any further mention of his retiring from business? I am anxious to hear whether Hodgkinson, whose name I cannot bear to write, will in any likelihood be thrown upon himself. The delightful weather we have had for 2 months is the highest gratification I could receive. No chilled red noses, no shivering, but fair atmosphere to think in, a clean towel, marked with a mangle, and a basin of clear water to drench one's face with 10 times a day. No need of much exercise, a mile a day being quite sufficient. My greatest regret is that I have not been well enough to bathe, though I have been 2 months by the seaside, and live now close to delicious bathing. Still, I enjoy the weather. I adore fine weather as the greatest blessing I can have. Give me books, fruit, French wine, and fine weather, and a little music out of doors, played by somebody I do not know. Not pay the price of one's time for a jig, but a little chance music, and I can pass a summer very quietly without caring much about Fat Louis, Fat Regent, or the Duke of Wellington. Why have you not written to me? Because you were in expectation of George's letter, and so waited? Mr. Brawne is copying out our tragedy of Otho the Great in a superb style, better than it deserves. There, as I said, is labor in vain for the present. I had hoped to give Kean another opportunity to shine. What can we do now? There is not another actor of tragedy in all London or Europe. The Covent Garden Company is execrable. Young is the best among them, and he is a ranting, coxcomical, tasteless actor, a disgust, a nausea, and yet the very best after Kean. What a set of barren asses are actors! I should like now to promenade round your gardens. Apple tasting, pear tasting, plum judging, apricot nibbling, peach scrunching, nectarine sucking, and melon carving. I have also a great feeling for antiquated cherries full of sugar cracks, and a white currant tree kept for company. I admire lolling on a lawn by a water-lilied pond to eat white currants and see goldfish, and go to the fair in the evening, if I'm good. There is not hope for that. One is sure to get into some mess before evening. Have these hot days I brag of so much been well or ill for your health? Let me hear soon. Your affectionate brother, John. End of Letter 113. Letter 114 of Letters of John Keats to his family and friends. Edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nemo. To John Taylor, Winchester, September 1, 1819. My dear Taylor, Brawne and I have been employed for these 3 weeks past from time to time in writing to our different friends. A dead silence is our only answer. We wait morning after morning. Tuesday is the day for the examiner to arrive. This is the second Tuesday, which has been barren even of a newspaper. Men should be in imitation of spirits, responsive to each other's note. Instead of that, I pipe and no one hath danced. We have been cursing like Mandeville and Lyle. With this I shall send by the same post a third letter to a friend of mine, who, though it is of consequence, has neither answered right or left. We have been much in want of news from the theatres, having heard that Kean is going to America. But no, not a word. Why I should come on you with all these complaints I cannot explain to myself, especially as I suspect you must be in the country. Do answer me soon, for I really must know something. I must steer myself by the rudder of information. Ever yours sincerely, John Keats. End of Letter 114. Letter 115 of Letters of John Keats to his family and friends. Edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nemo. To John Taylor, Winchester, September 5, 1819. My dear Taylor, this morning I received yours of the 2nd, and with it a letter from Hesse, enclosing a bank-post bill of £30, an ample sum, I assure you. More I had no thought of. You should not have delayed so long in Fleet Street. Leading an inactive life as you did was breathing poison. You will find the country air do more for you than you expect, but it must be proper country air. You must choose a spot. What sort of a place is Retford? You should have a dry, gravelly, barren, elevated country, open to the currents of air, and such a place is generally furnished with the finest springs. The neighborhood of a rich enclosed, fulsome, manured, arable land, especially in a valley, and almost as bad on a flat, would be almost as bad as the smoke of Fleet Street. Such a place as this was Shanklin, only open to the southeast, and surrounded by hills in every other direction. From the southeast came the damps of the sea, which, having no egress, the air would for days together take on an unhealthy idiosyncrasy, altogether enervating and weakening as the city smoke. I felt it very much. Since I have been here at Winchester, I have been improving in health. It is not so confined, and there is on one side of the city a dry chalky down, where the air is worth 6d. a pint. So if you do not get better at Redford, do not impute it to your own weakness, before you have well considered the nature of the air and soil, especially as autumn is encroaching, for the autumn fog over a rich land is like the steam from cabbage water. What makes the great difference between valesmen, flatlandmen, and mountaineers? The cultivation of the earth in a great measure. Our health, temperament, and disposition are taken more, notwithstanding the contradiction of the history of Cain and Abel, from the air we breathe, than is generally imagined. See the difference between a peasant and a butcher. I am convinced a great cause of it is the difference of the air they breathe. The one takes his mingled with the fume of slaughter, the other from the dank exhalement from the glebe. The teeming damp that comes up from the plough furrow is of great effect in taming the fierceness of a strong man, more than his labor. Let him be mowing furze upon a mountain, and at the day's end his thoughts will run upon an axe, if he ever had handled one. Let him leave the plough, and he will think quietly of his supper. Agriculture is the tamer of men. The steam from the earth is like drinking their mother's milk. It enervates their nature. This appears a great cause of the imbecility of the Chinese, and if this sort of atmosphere is a mitigation to the energy of a strong man, how much more must it injure a weak one, unoccupied, unexercised? For what is the cause of so many men maintaining a good state in cities but occupation, an idle man? A man who is not sensitively alive to self-interest in a city cannot continue long in good health. This is easily explained. If you were to walk leisurely through an unwholesome path in the fens, with a little horror of them, you would be sure to have your ague. But let Macbeth cross the same path, with a dagger in the air leading him on, and he would never have an ague or anything like it. You should give these things a serious consideration. Notts, I believe, is a flat county. You should be on the slope of one of the dry, barren hills in Somersetshire. I am convinced there is as harmful air to be breathed in the country as in town. I am gratefully obliged to you for your letter. Perhaps, if you had strength and spirits enough, you would have felt offended by my offering a note of hand, or rather expressed it. However, I am sure you will give me credit for not in any ways mistrusting you, or imagining that you would take advantage of any power I might give you over me. No, it proceeded from my serious resolve not to be a gratuitous borrower, from a great desire to be correct in money matters, to have in my desk the chronicles of them to refer to, and know my worldly non-estate. Besides, in case of my death, such documents would be but just, if merely as memorials of the friendly turns I had done to me. Had I known of your illness, I should not have written in such a fiery phrase in my first letter. I hope that shortly you will be able to bear 6 times as much. Brawne likes the tragedy very much, but he is not a fit judge of it, as I have only acted as midwife to his plot, and of course he will be fond of his child. I do not think I can make you any extracts without spoiling the effect of the whole, when you come to read it. I hope you will then not think of my labor misspent. Since I finished it, I have finished Lamia, and now occupied in revising St. Agnes's Eve and studying Italian. Ariosto I find is diffuse, in parts as Spenser. I understand completely the difference between them. I will cross the letter with some lines from Lamia, Browne's kindest remembrance to you, and I am ever your most sincere friend, John Keats. A haunting music soul, perhaps and lone, supportress of the fairy roof-made moan, throughout is fearful the whole charm might fade, fresh carved cedar, mimicking a glade of palm and plantain met from either side, and the high mitts in honor of the bride. 2 palms, and then 2 plantains, and so on. From either side their stems branched one to one. All down the aisled place, and beneath all, there ran a stream of lamps straight on from wall to wall. So canopied lay an untasted feast, teeming of perfume. Lamia, regal dressed, silvery paced about, and, as she went, missioned her viewless servants to enrich the splendid finish of each nook and niche. Between the tree stems, wainscoted at first, came jasper panels, then anon there burst forth creeping imagery of slighter trees, and, with the larger, wove in small intricacies. And so till she was sated, then came down, soft lighting on her head a brilliant crown, wreathed turban-wise of tender wannish fire, and sprinkled o'er with stars like Eridani's tiara. Approving all, she faded at self-will, and shut the chamber up close, hushed, and still, complete and ready for the revels rude, when dreadful guest would come to spoil her solitude. The day came soon, and all the gossip rout. O senseless Lycius! This is a good sample of this story. Brawne is gone to Chichester a-visiting. I shall be alone here for 3 weeks, expecting accounts of your health. End of Letter 115. Letter 116, Part 1, of Letters of John Keats to his family and friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nemo. To George and Georgiana Keats. Winchester, September 17, 1819, Friday. My dear George, I was closely employed in reading and composition in this place, whither I had come from Shankland for the convenience of a library, when I received your last dated 24th July. You will have seen by the short letter I wrote from Shankland how matters stand between us and Mr. Jennings. They had not at all moved, and I knew no way of overcoming the inveterate obstinacy of our affairs. On receiving your last, I immediately took a place in the same night's coach for London. Mr. Abbey behaved extremely well to me, appointed Monday evening at 7 to meet me, and observed that he should drink tea at that hour. I gave him the enclosed note, and showed him the last leaf of yours to me. He really appeared anxious about it, and promised he would forward your money as quickly as possible. I think I mentioned that Walton was dead. He will apply to Mr. Glidden, the partner, endeavoring to get rid of Mrs. Jennings' claim, and be expeditious. He has received an answer from my letter to Fry. That is something. We are certainly in a very low estate. I say we, for I am in such a situation that were it not for the assistance of Brawne and Taylor, I must be as badly off as a man can be. I could not raise any sum by the promise of any poem, no, not by the mortgage of my intellect. You must wait a little while. I really have hopes of success. I have finished a tragedy which, if it succeeds, will enable me to sell what I may have in manuscript to a good advantage. I have passed my time in reading, writing, and fretting. The last I intend to give up, and stick to the other 2. They are the only chances of benefit to us. Your wants will be a fresh spur to me. I assure you, you shall more than share what I can get whilst I am still young. The time may come when age will make me more selfish. I have not been well treated by the world, and yet I have capitally well. I do not know a person to whom so many purse strings would fly open as to me, if I could possibly take advantage of them, which I cannot do, for none of the owners of these purses are rich. Your present situation I will not suffer myself to dwell upon. When misfortunes are so real, we are glad enough to escape them and the thought of them. I cannot help thinking Mr. Audubon a dishonest man. Why did he make you believe that he was a man of property? How is it that his circumstances have altered so suddenly? In truth, I do not believe you fit to deal with the world, or at least the American world. But good God, who can avoid these chances? You have done your best. Take matters as coolly as you can, and confidently expecting help from England, act as if no help were nigh. Mine, I am sure, is a tolerable tragedy. It would have been a bank to me, if just as I had finished it, I had not heard of Kean's resolution to go to America. That was the worst news I could have had. There is no actor can do the principal character besides Kean. At Covent Garden there is a great chance of it being damned. Were it to succeed even there, it would lift me out of the mire. I mean the mire of a bad reputation, which is continually rising against me. My name with the literary fashionables is vulgar. I am a weaver boy to them. A tragedy would lift me out of this mess, and mess it is as far as regards our pockets. But be not cast down any more than I am. I feel that I can bear real ills better than imaginary ones. Whenever I find myself growing vaporish, I rouse myself, wash and put on a clean shirt, brush my hair and clothes, tie my shoestrings neatly, and in fact, Adonize as I were going out. Then, all clean and comfortable, I sit down to write. This I find the greatest relief. Besides, I am becoming accustomed to the privations of the pleasures of sense. In the midst of the world, I live like a hermit. I forgot how to lay plans for the enjoyment of any pleasure. I feel I can bear anything, any misery, even imprisonment, so long as I have neither wife nor child. Perhaps you say yours are your only comfort. They must be. I returned to Winchester the day before yesterday, and am now here alone, for Brawne, some days before I left, went to Bedhampton, and there he will be for the next fortnight. The term of his house will be up in the middle of next month, when we shall return to Hampstead. On Sunday I dined with your mother and Hen and Charles in Henrietta Street. Mr. and Mrs. Millar were in the country. Charles had been but a few days returned from Paris. I dare say you will have letters expressing the motives of his journey. Mrs. Wiley and Mrs. Waldegrave seem as quiet as the two mice there alone. I did not show your last. I thought it better not, for better times will certainly come, and why should they be unhappy in the meantime? On Monday morning I went to Walthamstow. Fanny looked better than I had seen her for some time. She complains of not hearing from you, appealing to me as if it were half my fault. I had been so long in retirement that London appeared a very odd place. I could not make out I had so many acquaintances, and it was a whole day before I could feel among men. I had another strange sensation. There was not one house I felt any pleasure to call at. Reynolds was in the country, and, saving himself, I am prejudiced against all that family. Dilke and his wife and child were in the country. Taylor was at Nottingham. I was out, and everybody was out. I walked among the streets as in a strange land. Rice was the only one at home. I passed some time with him. I know him better since we have lived a month together in the Isle of Wight. He is the most sensible and even wise man I know. He has a few John Bull prejudices, but they improve him. His illness is at times alarming. We are great friends, and there is no one I like to pass a day with better. Martin called in to bid him good-bye before he set out for Dublin. If you would like to hear one of his jokes, here is one which at the time we laughed at a good deal. A Miss Blank, with 3 young ladies, one of them Martin's sister, had come a-gadding in the Isle of Wight, and took for a few days a cottage opposite ours. We dined with them one day, and, as I was saying, they had fish. Miss said she thought they tasted of the boat. No, says Martin very seriously, they haven't been kept long enough. I saw Haslam. He is very much occupied with love and business, being one of Mr. Saunders' executors, and lover to a young woman. He showed me her picture by Severn. I think she is, though not very cunning, too cunning for him. Nothing strikes me so forcibly with a sense of the ridiculous as love. A man in love I do think cuts the sorriest figure in the world. Queer, when I know a poor fool to be really in pain about it. I could burst out laughing in his face. His pathetic visage becomes irresistible. Not that I take Haslam as a pattern for lovers. He is a very worthy man and a good friend. His love is very amusing. Somewhere in the Spectator is related an account of a man inviting a party of stutterers and squinters to his table. It would please me more to scrape together a party of lovers, not to dinner but to tea. There would be no fighting as among knights of old. Pensive they sit and roll their languid eyes, nibble their toast and cool their tea with sighs, or else forget the purpose of the night. Forget their tea, forget their appetite. See, with crossed arms they sit, ah, hapless crew! The fire is going out and no one rings for coals, and therefore no coals Betty brings. A fly is in the milk-pot. Must he die, circled by humane society? No, no, there, Mr. Werter, take his spoon, inserts it, dips the handle, and, lo, soon, the little straggler, saved from perils dark, across the tea-board draws a long, wet mark. Romeo, arise, take snuffers by the handle, there's a large cauliflower in each candle. A winding sheet, ah me, I must away to number 7, just beyond the circus gay. Alas, my friend, your coat sits very well. Where may your tailor live? I may not tell. Oh, pardon me, I'm absent now and then. Where might my tailor live? I say again, I cannot tell. Let me no more be teased. He lives in Wapping, might live where he pleased. You see, I cannot get on without writing, as boys do at school, a few nonsense verses. I begin them, and before I have written 6, the whim has passed. If there is anything deserving so respectable a name in them, I shall put in a bit of information anywhere, just as it strikes me. Mr. Abbey is to write to me as soon as he can bring matters to bear, and then I am to go to town and tell him the means of forwarding to you through Capper and Hazelwood. I wonder I did not put this before. I shall go on tomorrow. It is so fine now I must take a bit of a walk. Saturday, September 18. With my inconstant disposition, it is no wonder that this morning, amid all our bad times and misfortunes, I should feel so alert and well-spirited. At this moment you are perhaps in a very different state of mind. It is because my hopes are ever paramount to my despair. I have been reading over a part of a short poem I have composed lately, called Lamia, and I am certain there is that sort of fire in it that must take hold of people some way, give them either pleasant or unpleasant sensation. What they want is a sensation of some sort. I wish I could pitch the key of your spirits as high as mine is, but your organ loft is beyond the reach of my voice. I admire the exact admeasurement of my niece in your mother's letter. Oh, the little span-long elf! I'm not in the least a judge of the proper weight and size of an infant. Never trouble yourselves about that. She is sure to be a fine woman. Let her have only the delicate nails both on hands and feet, and both as small as a mayfly's, who will live you his life on a 3 square inch of oak leaf. And nails she must have, quite different from the market woman here, who plough into butter and make a 1/4 pound taste of it. I intend to write a letter to your wife, and there I may say more on this little plump subject. I hope she's plump, still harping on my daughter. This Winchester is a place tolerably well suited to me. There is a fine cathedral, a college, a Roman Catholic chapel, a Methodist D.O., an Independent D.O., and there is not one loom, or anything like a manufacturing beyond bread and butter, in the whole city. There are a number of rich Catholics in the place. It is a respectable, ancient, aristocratic place, and moreover, it contains a nunnery. Our set are by no means so hail-fellow well met on literary subjects as we are wont to be. Reynolds is turned to the law. By the by, he brought out a little piece at the Lyceum called 1234 by advertisement. It met with complete success. The meaning of this odd title is explained when I tell you the principal actor is a mimic, who takes off 4 of our best performers in the course of the farce. Our stage is loaded with mimics. I did not see the piece, being out of town the whole time it was in progress. Dilke is entirely swallowed up in his boy. It is really lamentable to what a pitch he carries a sort of parental mania. I had a letter from him at Shanklin. He went on a word or two about the Isle of Wight, which is a bit of a hobby horse of his, but he soon deviated to his boy. I am sitting, says he, at the window expecting my boy from— I suppose I told you somewhere that he lives in Westminster, and his boy goes to school there, where he gets beaten, and every bruise he has, and I dare say deserves, is very bitter to Dilke. The place I am speaking of puts me in mind to a circumstance which occurred lately at Dilke's. I think it very rich and dramatic, and quite illustrative of the little quiet fun that he will enjoy sometimes. First, I must tell you that their house is at the corner of Great Smith Street, so that some of the windows look into one street, and the back windows into another round the corner. Dilke had some old people to dinner. I know not who, but there were 2 old ladies among them. Brawne was there. They had known him from a child. Brawne is very pleasant with old women, and on that day it seems behaved himself so winningly that they became hand and glove together and a little complimentary. Brawne was obliged to depart early. He bid them good-bye and passed into the passage. No sooner was his back turned than the old women began lauding him. When Brawne had reached the street door and was just going, Dilke threw up the window and called, "Brawne, Brawne, they say you look younger than ever you did." Brawne went on, and had just turned the corner into the other street, when Dilke appeared at the back window crying, "Brawne, Brawne, by God, they say you're handsome." You see what a many words it requires to give any identity to a thing I could have told you in half a minute. I have been reading lately Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, and I think you'll be very much amused with a page I here copy for you. I call it a feu de joie around the batteries of Fort St-de-Fraise on the birthday of the da Gama. The whole alphabet was drawn up in a phalanx on the corner of an old dictionary, band playing, amo, amas, etc. Every lover admires his mistress, though she be very deformed of herself, ill-favoured, wrinkled, pimpled, pale, red, yellow, tanned, tallow-faced, have a swollen juggler's platter face, or a thin, lean, chitty face, have clouds in her face, be crooked, dry, bald, google-eyed, bleary-eyed, or with staring eyes. She looks like a squished cat. Hold her head still awry, heavy, dull, hollow-mouthed. Persian hook-nose, have a sharp Joe's nose, a red nose, china flat, great nose, nersimo patuluk, a nose like a promontory, gubber-tushed, rotten teeth, black, uneven, brown teeth, beetle-browed, a witch's beard, her breath stink all over the room, her nose drop winter and summer with a Bavarian poke under her chin, a sharp chin, lave-eared, with a long crane's neck, which stands awry too, pendulous mammoths, her dugs like 2 double jugs, or else no dugs in the other extreme. Bloody fallen fingers, she have filthy long unpared nails, scabbed hands or wrist, a tanned skin, a rotten carcass, crooked back. She stoops, is lame, splee-footed, as slender in the middle as a cow in the waist, gouty legs. Her ankles hang over her shoes, her feet stink. She breed lice, a mere changeling, a very monster, and often perfect. Her whole complexion savours, a harsh voice, incondite gesture, vile gait, a vast virago, or an ugly tit, a slug, a fat fustilugs, a truss, a long lean rawbone, a skeleton, a sneaker, si qua latent milor puta, and to thy judgment looks like a marred in a lanthorn, whom thou couldst not fancy for a world, but hatest, loathest, and wouldst have spit in her face, or blow thy nose in her bosom, or medium amoris to another man, a dowdy, a slut, a scold, a nasty, rank, rammy, filthy, beastly queen, dishonest peradventure, obscene, base, beggarly, rude, foolish, untaught, peevish, Iris's daughter, Thurcerite's sister, Gobelinian's scholar. If he love her once, he admires her for all this. He takes no notice of any such errors or imperfections of body or mind. There's a dose for you. Fire! I would give my favorite leg to have written this as a speech in a play. With what effect could Matthews pop-gun it at the pit? This, I think, will amuse you more than so much poetry. Of that I do not like to copy any, as I'm afraid it is too mal apropos for you at the present. And yet I will send you some, for by the time you receive it things in England may have taken a different turn. When I left Mr. Abbey on Monday evening, I walked up Cheapside, but he returned to put some letters in the post, and met him again in Bucklesbury. We walked together through the Poultry as far as the baker's shop. He has some concern in. He spoke of it in such a way to me, I thought he wanted me to make an offer to assist him in it. I do believe if I could be a hatter I might be one. He seems anxious about me. He began blowing up Lord Byron while I was sitting with him. However, maybe the fellow says true now and then, at which he took up a magazine and read me some extracts from Don Juan, Lord Byron's last flash poem, and particularly one against literary ambition. I do think I must be well spoken of among sets, for Hodgkinson is more than polite, and the coffee German endeavored to be very close to me the other night at Covent Garden, where I went at half price before I tumbled into bed. Everyone, however distant in acquaintance, behaves in the most conciliating manner to me. You will see I speak of this as a matter of interest. On the next sheet I will give you a little politics. In every age there has been in England for 2 or 3 centuries subjects of great popular interest on the carpet, so that however great the uproar, one can scarcely prophesy any material change in the government, for his loud disturbances have agitated the country many times. All civilized countries become gradually more enlightened, and there should be a continual change for the better. Look at this country at present, and remember it, when it was even thought impious to doubt the justice of a trial by combat. From that time there has been a gradual change. 3 great changes have been in progress, first for the better, next for the worse, and a third for the better once more. The first was the gradual annihilation of the tyranny of the nobles, when kings found it in their interest to conciliate the common people, elevate them, and be just to them. Just when baronial power ceased and before standing armies were so dangerous, taxes were few, kings were lifted by the people over the heads of their nobles, and those people held a rod over kings. The change for the worse in Europe was again this: the obligation of kings to the multitude began to be forgotten. Custom had made noblemen the humble servants of kings. Then kings turned to the nobles as the adorners of their power, the slaves of it, and from the people as creatures continually endeavoring to check them. Then in every kingdom there was a long struggle of kings to destroy all popular privileges. The English were the only people in Europe who made a grand kick at this. They were slaves to Henry VIII, but were free men under William III, at the time the French were abject slaves under Louis XIV. The example of England and the liberal writers of France and England sowed the seed of opposition to this tyranny, and it was swelling in the ground till it burst out in the French Revolution. That has had an unlucky termination. It put a stop to the rapid progress of free sentiments in England, and gave our courts hopes of turning back to the despotism of the 18th century. They have made a handle of this event in every way to undermine our freedom. They spread a horrid superstition against all innovation and improvement. The present struggle in England of the people is to destroy this superstition. What has roused them to do it is their distresses. Perhaps, on this account, the present distresses of this nation are a fortunate thing, though so horrid in their experience. You will see, I mean, that the French Revolution put a temporary stop to this third change, the change for the better. Now it is in progress again, and I think it is an effectual one. This is no contest between Whig and Tory, but between right and wrong. There is scarcely a grain of party spirit now in England. Right and wrong considered by each man abstractedly is the fashion. I know very little of these things. I am convinced, however, that apparently small causes make great alterations. There are little signs whereby we may know how matters are going on. This makes the business of Carlyle the bookseller of great amount to my mind. He has been selling diastical pamphlets, republished Tom Paine, and many other works held in superstitious horror. He even has been selling for some time immense numbers of a work called The Deist, which comes out in weekly numbers. For this conduct he, I think, has had about a dozen indictments issued against him, for which he has found bail to the amount of many £1,000s. After all, they are afraid to prosecute. They are afraid of his defense. It would be published in all the papers all over the empire. They shudder at this. The trials would light a flame they could not extinguish. Do you not think this of great import? You will hear by the papers of the proceedings at Manchester and Hunt's triumphal entry into London. It would take me a whole day and a quire of paper to give you anything like detail. I will merely mention that it is calculated 30,000 people were in the streets waiting for him. The whole distance from the Angel at Islington to the Crown and Anchor was lined with multitudes. As I passed Colnagi's window, I saw a profile portrait of Sant, the destroyer of Kotzebue. His very look must interest everyone in his favor. I suppose they have represented him in his college dress. He seems to me like a young Abelard, a fine mouth, cheekbones, and this is no joke, full of sentiment, a fine, unvulgar nose, and plump temples. On looking over some letters I found the one I wrote intended for you from the foot of Helvellyn to Liverpool. But you had sailed, and therefore it was returned to me. It contained, among other nonsense, an acrostic of my sister's name, and a pretty long name it is. I wrote it in a great hurry, which you will see. Indeed, I would not copy it if I thought it would ever be seen by any but yourselves. Give me your patience, sister, while I frame exact in capitals your golden name, or sue the fair Apollo, and he will rouse from his heavy slumber and instill great love in me for thee and poesy. Imagine not the greatest mastery in kingdom over all the realms of verse nears more to heaven in aught than when we nurse and surety give to love and brotherhood. Anthropophagy in Othello's mood Ulysses stormed, and his enchanted belt glowed with the muse, but they are never felt, unbosomed so, and so eternal made, such tender incense in their laurel shade, to all the recent sisters of the Nine, as this poor offering to you, sister mine. Kind sister, I, this third name says you are, enchanted has it been the Lord knows where, and may its taste to you, like good old wine, take you to real happiness, and give sons, daughters, and a home like honeyed hive. Foot of Helvellyn, June 27. I sent you in my first packet some of my Scotch letters. I find I have one kept back, which was written in the most interesting part of our tour, and will copy part of it in the hope you will not find it unamusing. I would give now anything for Richardson's power of making mountains of molehills. Incipit Epistola Caledoniensia. Duncan Cullen. I did not know the day of the month, for I find I have not added it. Brawne must have been asleep. Just after my last had gone to the post. Before I go any further, I must premise that I would send the identical letter instead of taking the trouble to copy it. I do not do so, for it would spoil my notion of the neat manner in which I intended to fold these 3 genteel sheets. The original is written on coarse paper, and the soft one would ride in the post-bag very uneasy, Perhaps there might be a quarrel. I ought to make a large question mark here, but I'd better take the opportunity of telling you I've got rid of my haunting sore throat, and conduct myself in a manner not to catch another. You speak of Lord Byron and me. There is this great difference between us. He describes what he sees. I describe what I imagine. Mine is the hardest task. Now see the immense difference. The Edinburgh reviewers are afraid to touch upon my poem. They do not know what to make of it. They do not like to condemn it, and they will not praise it for fear. They are as shy of it as I should be of wearing a Quaker's hat. The fact is, they have no real taste. They dare not compromise their judgments on so puzzling a question. If on my next publication they should praise me and so lug in Endymion, I will address them in a manner they will not at all relish. The cowardliness of the Edinburgh is more than the abuse of the Quarterly. End of Letter 116, Part 1. Letter 116, Part 2, of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nemo. To George and Georgiana Keats. Monday, September 20. This day is a grand day for Winchester. They elect the mayor. It was indeed high time the place should have some sort of excitement. There was nothing going on, all asleep. Not an old maid sedan returning from a card party. And if any old woman have got tipsy at christenings, they have not exposed themselves in the street. The first night, though, of our arrival here, there was a slight uproar took place at about 10 of the clock. We heard distinctly a noise padding down the street, as of a walking cane of the good old dowager breed. In a little minute after we heard a less voice observe, "What a noise the ferule made! It must be loose." Brawne wanted to call the constables, but I observed it was only a little breeze and would soon pass over. The side streets here are excessively maiden-ladylike, the doorsteps always fresh from the flannel. The knockers have a very staid, serious collection of lions and ram's heads, the doors most part black, with a little brass handle just above the keyhole, so that you may easily shut yourself out of your own house. He he! There is none of your Lady Bellaston ringing and rapping here, no thundering Jupiter footmen, no opera treble tattoos, but a modest lifting up of the knocker by a set of little wee old fingers that peep through the grey mittens, and a dying fall thereof. The great beauty of poetry is that it makes everything in every place interesting. The Palatine Venice and the Abatine Winchester are equally interesting. Some time since I began a poem called The Eve of St. Mark, quite in the spirit of town quietude. I think I will give you the sensation of walking about an old country town in a coolish evening. I know not whether I shall ever finish it. I will give it as far as I have gone. Ut tibi plaxat. The Eve of St. Mark. Upon a Sabbath day it fell, twice holy was the Sabbath bell, that called the folk to evening prayer. The city streets were clean and fair, from wholesome drench of April rains, and when on western window panes the chilly sunset faintly told of unmatured green valleys cold, of the green thorny bloomless hedge, of rivers new of springtime sedge, of primroses by sheltered rills, and daisies on the aguish hills. Twice holy was the Sabbath bell, the silent streets were crowded well, with staid and pious companies, warm from their fireside oratories, and moving with demurest air to even song and vesper prayer. Each arched porch and entry low was filled with patient folk and slow, with whispers, hush, and shuffling feet, while played the organ loud and sweet. The bells had ceased, the prayers begun, and Bertha had not yet half done, a curious volume, patched and torn, that all day long from earliest morn had taken captive her 2 eyes, among its golden broideries, perplexed her with 1,000 things, the stars of heaven and angels' wings, martyrs in a fiery blaze, azure saints in silver rays, Moses' breastplate and the 7 candlesticks John saw in heaven, the winged lion of Saint Mark, and the covenantal ark, with its many mysteries, cherubim and golden mice. Bertha was a maiden fair, dwelling in the old Minster Square. From her fireside she could see, sidelong, its rich antiquity, far as the bishop's garden wall, where sycamores and elm trees tall, full-leaved the forest had outstripped, by no sharp north wind ever nipped, so sheltered by the mighty pile, Bertha arose and read awhile. With forehead 'gainst the window pane, again she tried, and then again, until the dusk eve left her dark upon the legend of Saint Mark. From plaited lawn frill fine and thin, she lifted up her soft warm chin, with aching neck and swimming eyes, and dazed with saintly imageries. All was gloom and silent all, save now and then the still footfall of one returning homewards late, past the echoing minster gate. The clamorous daws that all the day above the tree-tops and towers play, pair by pair had gone to rest, each in ancient belfry nest, where asleep they fall betimes to music and the drowsy chimes. All was silent, all was gloom, abroad and in the homely room. Down she sat, poor cheated soul, and struck a lamp from the dismal coal, leaned forward with bright drooping hair, and slant book full against the glare. Her shadow, in uneasy guise, hovered about a giant's size, on ceiling beam and old oak chair, the parrot's cage and panel square, and the warm angled winter screen, on which were many monsters seen, called doves of Siam, lima mice, and legless birds of paradise, macaw and tender Ava Devat, and silken-furred Angora cat. Untired she read, her shadow still glowered about as it would fill the room with wildest forms and shades, as though some ghostly queen of spades had come to mock behind her back, and dance and ruffle her garments black. Untired she read the legend page of holy mark from youth to age, on land, on sea, in pagan chains, rejoicing for his many pains. Sometimes the learned eremite, with golden star or dagger bright, referred to pious poesies, written in smallest crow-quill size. Beneath the text, and thus the rhyme was parcelled out from time to time. Alas, writeth he of sweet Venice, man hand beforn they wake in bliss, wan that her friends think him bound in crimped shroud far underground, and how a little child mote be a saint ere its nativity. Gift that the martyr, God her bless, keepin in solitariness, and kissin devout the holy croach of goddess love and Satan's force. He writeth, and things many more, of switchy things I may not show, but I must tellen verily, some dell of Saint Cicely, and chiefly what he autocreeth of Saint Mark's life and death. At length her constant eyelids come upon the fervent martyrdom, then lastly to his holy shrine exalt amid the taper shine at Venice. I hope you will like this for all its carelessness. I must take an opportunity here to observe that, though I am writing to you, I am all the while writing at your wife. This explanation will account for my speaking sometimes hoity-toity-ishly, whereas, if you were alone, I should sport a little more sober sadness. I am like a squinty gentleman, who, saying soft things to one lady, ogles another, or, what is as bad, in arguing with a person on his left hand, appeals with his eyes to the one on the right. His vision is elastic. He bends it to a certain object, but having a patent spring, it flies off. Writing has this disadvantage of speaking. One cannot write a wink or a nod or a grin or a purse of the lips, or a smile. O law! One cannot put one's finger to one's nose, or yerk ye in the ribs, or lay hold of your button in writing. But in all the most lively and titterly parts of my letter you must not fail to imagine me, as the epic poets say, now here, now there, now with one foot pointed at the ceiling, now with another, now with my pen on my ear, now with my elbow in my mouth. Oh, my friends, you lose the action, and attitude is everything, as Fuseli said, when he took up his leg like a musket to shoot a swallow just darting behind his shoulder. And yet, does not the word mum go for one's finger beside the nose? I hope it does, and I have to make use of the word mum before I tell you that Severn has got a little baby, all his own, let us hope. He told Brawne he had given up painting and had turned modeler. I hope sincerely 'tis not a party concern, that no Mr. Blank or Blank is the real Pinxit and Severn the poor sculpsit to this work of art. You know he has long studied in the life alchemy. Haydon, yes, your wife will say. Here's a sum total account of Haydon again. I wonder your brother don't put a monthly bulletin in the Philadelphia papers about him. I won't hear. No. Skip down to the bottom, and there are some more of his verses. Skip, lullaby by, them too. No, let's go regularly through. I won't hear a word about Haydon. Bless the child, how riotous she is. There, go on there. Now pray go on here, for I have a few words to say about Haydon, before this chancery threat had cut off my every legitimate supply of cash for me. I had a little at my disposal. Haydon being very much in want, I lent him £30 of it. Now in the seesaw game of life, I got nearest to the ground, and this chancery business riveted me there, so that I was sitting in that uneasy position where the seat slants so abominably. I applied to him for payment. He could not. That was no wonder. But Goodman Delver, where was the wonder then? Why marry in this? He did not seem to care much about it, and let me go without my money with almost nonchalance, when he ought to have sold his drawings to supply me. I shall perhaps still be acquainted with him, but for friendship that is at an end. Brawne has been my friend in this. He got him to sign a bond, payable 3 months. Haslam has assisted me with the return of part of the money you lent him. Hunt. There, says your wife, there's another of those dull folk. Not a syllable about my friends? Well, Hunt. What about Hunt? You little thing. See how she bites my finger. My, is not this a tooth? Well, when you have done with the tooth, read on. Not a syllable about your friends. Here are some syllables. As far as I could smoke things on the Sunday before last, thus matters stood in Henrietta Street. Henry was a greater blade than ever. I remember to have seen him. He had on a very nice coat, a becoming waistcoat and buff trousers. I think his face has lost a little of the Spanish brown, but no flesh. He carved some beef exactly to suit my appetite, as if I had been measured for it. As I stood looking out of the window of Charles after dinner, quizzing the passengers, at which I am sorry to say he is too apt, I observed that this young son of a gun's whiskers had begun to curl and curl, little twist and twist, all down the sides of his face, getting properly thickest on the angles of the visage. He certainly will have a notable pair of whiskers. How shiny your gown is in front, says Charles. Why don't you see? 'Tis an apron, says Henry. Whereat I scrutinized, and behold your mother had a purple stuff gown on, and over it an apron of the same color, being the same cloth that was used for the lining. And furthermore, to account for the shining, it was the first day of wearing. I guessed as much of the gown, but that is entre nous. Charles likes England better than France. They've got a fat, smiling, fair cook as ever you saw. She is a little lame, but that improves her. It makes her go more swimmingly. When I asked, "Is Mrs. Wiley within?" she gave me such a large 35-year-old smile, it made me look round upon the 4th stair. It might have been the 5th. But that's a puzzle. I shall never be able, if I were to set myself a recollecting for a year, to recollect, I think. I remember 2 or 3 specks in her teeth, but I really can't say exactly. Your mother said something about Miss Giesel. What that was is quite a riddle to me now. Whether she had got fatter or thinner, or broader or longer, straighter, or had taken to the zigzags. Whether she had taken to or had left off ass's milk. That, by the by, she ought never to touch. How much better it would be to put her out to nurse with the wise woman of Brentford. I can say no more on so spare a subject. Miss Millar now is a different morsel. If one knew how to divide and subdivide, theme her out into sections and subsections, lay a little on every part of her body as it is divided, in common with all her fellow creatures, in Moore's Almanac. But alas, I have not heard a word about her, no cue to begin with. There is indeed a buzz about her, and her mother's being at old Mrs. So-and-so, who was like to die, as the Jews say. But I dare say, keeping up their dialect, she was not like to die. I must tell you a good thing Reynolds did. 'Twas the best thing he ever said. You know, at taking leave of a party at a doorway, sometimes a man dallies and foolishes and gets awkward, and does not know how to make off to advantage. Good-bye, well, good-bye, and yet he does not go. Good-bye, and so on. Well, good bless you, you know what I mean. Now Reynolds was in this predicament, and got out of it in a very witty way. He was leaving us at Hampstead. He delayed, and we were pressing at him, and he even said, "Be off," at which he put the tails of his coat between his legs, and sneaked off as nigh like a spaniel as could be. He went with flying colours. This is very clever. I must, being upon the subject, tell you another good thing of him. He began, for the service it might be of to him in the law, to learn French. He had lessons at the cheap rate of 2 shillings 6 pence per fag, and observed to Brawne, "Gad," says he, "the man sells his lessons so cheap, he must have stolen them." You have heard of Hook, the farce writer. Horace Smith said to one who asked him if he knew Hook, "Oh, yes, Hook and I are very intimate. There is a page of wit for you, to put John Bunyan's emblems out of countenance." Tuesday, September 21st. You see, I keep adding a sheet daily till I send the packet off, which I shall not do for a few days, as I am inclined to write a good deal, for there can be nothing so remembrancing and enchaining as a good long letter, be it composed of what it may. From the time you left me, our friends say I have altered completely, am not the same person. Perhaps in this letter I am, for in a letter one takes up one's existence from the time we last met. I dare say you have altered also. Every man does. Our bodies every 7 years are completely materialed. 7 years ago it was not this hand that clinched itself against Hammond. We are like the relict garments of a saint, the same and not the same, for the careful monks patch it and patch it till there's not a thread of the original garment left, and still they show it for St. Anthony's shirt. This is the reason why men, who have been bosom friends, on being separated for any number of years, meet coldly, neither of them knowing why. The fact is, they are both altered. Men who live together have a silent moulding and influencing power over each other. They inter-assimilate. 'Tis an uneasy thought that in 7 years the same hands cannot greet each other again. All this may be obviated by a wilful and dramatic exercise of our minds towards each other. Some think I have lost that poetic ardor and fire 'tis said I once had. The fact is, perhaps I have, but instead of that, I hope I shall substitute a more thoughtful and quiet power. I am more frequently now contented to read and think, but now and then haunted with ambitious thoughts. Quieter in my pulse, improved in my digestion, exerting myself against vexing speculations, scarcely content to write the best verses for the fever they leave behind. I want to compose without this fever. I hope I one day shall. You would scarcely imagine I could live alone so comfortably, keepin' in solitariness. I told Anne, the servant here, the other day, to say I was not at home if anyone should call. I am not certain how I should endure loneliness and bad weather together. Now the time is beautiful. I take a walk every day for an hour before dinner, and this is generally my walk. I go out the back gate, across one street, into the cathedral yard, which is always interesting. There I pass under the trees along a paved path, past the beautiful front of the cathedral, turn to the left under a stone doorway. Then I am on the other side of the building, which, leaving behind me, I pass on through two college-like squares, seemingly built for the dwelling place of deans and prebendaries, garnished with grass and shaded with trees. Then I pass through one of the old city gates, and then you are in one college street, through which I pass, and at the end thereof, crossing some meadows, and at last a country alley of gardens, I arrive, that is, my worship arrives, at the foundation of St. Cross, which is a very interesting old place, both for its Gothic tower and alms square, and for the appropriation of its rich rents to a relation of the Bishop of Winchester. Then I pass across St. Cross meadows till you come to the most beautifully clear river. Now this is only 1 mile of my walk. I will spare you the other 2 till after supper, when they would do you more good. You must avoid going the first mile best after dinner. Wednesday, September 22nd. I could almost advise you to put by this nonsense until you are lifted out of your difficulties. But when you come to this part, feel with confidence what I now feel, that though there can be no stop put to troubles we are inheritors of, there can be, and must be, an end to immediate difficulties. Rest in the confidence that I will not omit any exertion to benefit you by some means or other. If I cannot remit you hundreds, I will tens, and if not that, ones. Let the next year be managed by you as well as possible. The next month, I mean, for I trust you will soon receive Abby's remittance. What he can send you will not be a sufficient capital to ensure you any command in America. What he has of mine I have nearly anticipated by debts, so I would advise you not to sink it, but to live upon it, in hopes of my being able to increase it. To this end I will devote whatever I may gain for a few years to come, at which period I must begin to think of a security of my own comforts, when quiet will become more pleasant to me than the world. Still, I would have you doubt my success. 'Tis at present the cast of a die with me. You say, these things will be a great torment to me. I shall not suffer them to be so. I shall only exert myself the more, while the seriousness of their nature will prevent me from nursing up imaginary griefs. I have not had the blue devils once since I received your last. I am advised not to publish till it is seen whether the tragedy will or not succeed. Should it, a few months may see me in the way of acquiring property. Should it not, it will be a drawback, and I shall have to perform a longer literary pilgrimage. You will perceive that it is quite out of my interest to come to America. What could I do there? How could I employ myself out of reach of libraries? You do not mention the name of the gentleman who assists you. 'Tis an extraordinary thing. How could you do without that assistance? I will not trust myself with brooding over this. The following is an extract from a letter of Reynolds to me. I am glad to hear you are getting on so well with your writings. I hope you are not neglecting the revision of your poems for the press, from which I expect more than you do. The first thought that struck me on reading your last was to mortgage a poem to Murray, but on more consideration I made up my mind not to do so. My reputation is very low. He would not have negotiated my bill of intellect, or given me a very small sum. I should have bound myself down for some time. 'Tis best to meet present misfortunes, not for a momentary good to sacrifice great benefits which one's own untrammeled and free industry may bring one in the end. In all this do never think of me as in any way unhappy. I shall not be so. I have a great pleasure in thinking of my responsibility to you, and shall do myself the greatest luxury, if I can succeed in any way so as to be of assistance to you. We shall look back upon these times even before our eyes are at all dim. I am convinced of it. But be careful of those Americans. I could almost advise you to come whenever you have the sum of £500 to England. Those Americans will, I am afraid, still fleece you. If ever you think of such a thing, you must bear in mind the very different state of society here, the immense difficulties of the times, the great sum required per annum to maintain yourself in any decency. In fact, the whole is with Providence. I know not how to advise you, but by advising you to advise with yourself. In your next, tell me at large your thoughts about America, what chance there is of succeeding there, for it appears to me you have as yet been somehow deceived. I cannot help thinking Mr. Audubon has deceived you. I shall not like the sight of him. I shall endeavor to avoid seeing him. You see how puzzled I am. I have no meridian to fix you to, being the slave of what is to happen. I think I may bid you finally remain in good hopes, and not tease yourself with my changes and variations of mind. If I say nothing decisive in any one particular part of my letter, you may glean the truth from the whole pretty correctly. You may wonder why I had not put your affairs with Abby in train on receiving your letter before last, to which there will reach you a short answer dated from Shanklin. I did write and speak to Abby, but to no purpose. Your last, with the enclosed note, has appealed home to him. He will not see the necessity of a thing till he is hit in the mouth. 'Twill be effectual. I am sorry to mix up foolish and serious things together, but in writing so much I am obliged to do so, and I hope sincerely the tenor of your mind will maintain itself better. In the course of a few months I shall be as good an Italian scholar as I am a French one. I am reading Ariosto at present, not managing more than 6 or 8 stanzas at a time. When I have done this language, so as to be able to read it tolerably well, I shall set myself to get complete in Latin, and there my learning must stop. I do not think of returning upon Greek. I would not go even so far if I were not persuaded of the power the knowledge of any language gives one. The fact is, I like to be acquainted with foreign languages. It is, besides, a nice way of filling up intervals, etc. Also, the reading of Dante is well worth the while, and in Latin there is a fund of curious literature of the Middle Ages, the works of many great men, Aretino and Sannazaro and Machiavelli. I shall never become attached to a foreign idiom so as to put it into my writings. The Paradise Lost, though so fine in itself, is a corruption of our language. It should be kept as it is, unique, a curiosity, a beautiful grand curiosity, the most remarkable production of the world, a northern dialect accommodating itself to Greek and Latin inversions and intonations. The purest English, I think, or what ought to be the purest, is Chatterton's. The language had existed long enough to be entirely uncorrupted of Chaucer's Gallicisms, and still the old words are used. Chatterton's language is entirely northern. I prefer the native music of it to Milton's, cut by feet. I have but lately stood on my guard against Milton. Life to him would be death to me. Miltonic verse cannot be written, but it is the verse of art. I wish to devote myself to another verse alone. Friday, September 24. I have been obliged to intermit your letter for 2 days, this being Friday morning, from having had to attend to other correspondence. Brawne, who is at Bedhampton, went thence to Chichester, and I am still directing my letters Bedhampton. There arose a misunderstanding about them. I began to suspect my letters had been stopped from curiosity. However, yesterday Brawne had 4 letters from me all in a lump, and the matter is cleared up. Brawne complained very much in his letter to me of yesterday of the great alteration the disposition of Dilke has undergone. He thinks of nothing but political justice and his boy. Now, the first political duty a man ought to have a mind to is the happiness of his friends. I wrote Brawne a comment on the subject, wherein I explained what I thought of Dilke's character, which resolved itself into this conclusion, that Dilke was a man who cannot feel he has a personal identity unless he has made up his mind about everything. The only means of strengthening one's intellect is to make up one's mind about nothing, to let the mind be a thoroughfare for all thoughts, not a select party. The genus is not scarce in population. All the stubborn arguers you meet with are of the same brood. They never begin upon a subject they have not pre-resolved on. They want to hammer their nail into you, and if you have the point, still they think you wrong. Dilke will never come at a truth as long as he lives, because he is always trying at it. He is a Godwin Methodist. I must not forget to mention that your mother showed me the lock of hair. 'Tis of a very dark color for so young a creature. Then it is 2 feet in length. I shall not stand a barleycorn higher. That's not fair. One ought to go on growing as well as others. At the end of this sheet, I shall stop for the present and send it off. You may expect another letter immediately after it, as I never know the day of the month but by chance. I put here that this is the 24th September. I would wish you here to stop your ears, for I have a word or two to say to your wife. My dear sister, in the first place, I must quarrel with you for sending me such a shabby piece of paper, though that is in some degree made up for by the beautiful impression of the seal. You should like to know what I was doing the 1st of May. Let me see, I cannot recollect. I have all the examiners ready to send. They will be a great treat to you when they reach you. I shall pack them up when my business with Abby has come to a good conclusion, and the remittance is on the road to you. I have dealt round your best wishes like a pack of cards, but being always given to cheat myself, I have turned up ace. You see, I am making game of you. I see you are not at all happy in that America. England, however, would not be over happy for you if you were here. Perhaps 'twould be better to be teased here than there. I must preach patience to you both. No step hasty or injurious to you must be taken. You say let one large sheet be all to me. You will find more than that in different parts of this packet for you. Certainly, I have been caught in rains. A catch in the rain occasioned my last sore throat. But as for the red-haired girls, upon my word, I do not recollect ever having seen one. Are you quizzing me or Miss Waldegrave when you talk of promenading? As for pun-making, I wish it was as good a trade as pin-making. There is very little business of that sort going on now. We struck for wages, like the Manchester weavers, but to no purpose. So we are all out of employ. I am more lucky than some, you see, by having an opportunity of exporting a few, getting into a little foreign trade, which is a comfortable thing. I wish one could get change for a pun in silver currency. I would give 3.5 any night to get into Drury Pit, but they won't ring at all. No more will notes, you will say, but notes are different things, though they make together a pun note as the term goes. If I were your son, I shouldn't mind you, though you rapped me with the scissors. But, Lord, I should be out of favour when the little un be comed. You have made an uncle of me, you have, and I don't know what to make of myself. I suppose next there will be a nevy. You say in my last, write directly. I have not received your letter above 10 days. The thought of your little girl puts me in mind of a thing I heard a Mr. Lamb say. A child in arms was passing by towards its mother, in the nurse's arms. Lamb took hold of the long clothes, saying, "Where, God bless me, where does it leave off?" Saturday, September 25. If you would prefer a joke or two to anything else, I have 2 for you, fresh hatched, just riz, as the baker's wife say by the rolls. The first I played off on Brawne. The second I played on myself. Brawne, when he left me, "Keats," says he, "my good fellow," staggering upon his left heel and fetching an irregular pirouette with his right. "Keats," says he, depressing his left eyebrow and elevating his right one, though by the way at the moment I did not know which was the right one. "Keats," says he, still in the same posture, but furthermore both his hands in his waistcoat pockets and putting out his stomach. "Keats, my good fellow," says he, interlarding his exclamation with a certain ventriloquial parenthesis. No, this is all a lie. He was as sober as a judge when a judge happens to be sober, and said, Keats, if any letters come from me, do not forward them, but open them, and give me the morrow of them in a few words. At the time I wrote my first to him, no letter had arrived. I thought I would invent one, and as I had not time to manufacture a long one, I dabbed off a short one, and that was the reason of the joke succeeding beyond my expectations. Brawne let his house to a Mr. Benjamin, a Jew. Now the water which furnishes the house is in a tank, sided with a composition of lime, and the lime impregnates the water unpleasantly. Taking advantage of this circumstance, I pretended that Mr. Benjamin had written the following short note. Sir, by drinking your damned tank water, I have got the gravel. What reparation can you make to me and my family? Nathan Benjamin. By a fortunate hit, I hit upon his right heathen name, his right pronomen. Brawne, in consequence, appears, wrote to the surprised Mr. Benjamin the following. Sir, I cannot offer you any remuneration until your gravel shall have formed itself into a stone, when I will cut you with pleasure. C. Brawne. This of Brawne's Mr. Benjamin has answered, insisting on an explanation of this singular circumstance. B. says, When I read your letter and his following, I roared, and in came Mr. Snook, who on reading them seemed likely to burst the hoops of his fat sides. So the joke is told well. Now for the one I played on myself. I must first give you the scene and the dramatis personae. There are an old major and his youngish wife here in the next apartments to me. His bedroom door opens at an angle with my sitting-room door. Yesterday I was reading as demurely as a parish clerk, when I heard a rap at the door. I got up and opened it. No one was to be seen. I listened, and heard someone in the major's room. Not content with this, I went upstairs and down, looked in the cupboards and watched. At last I set myself to read again, not quite so demurely, when there came a louder rap. I was determined to find out who it was. I looked out. The staircases were all silent. This must be the major's wife, said I. At all events, I will see the truth. So I rapped me at the major's door and went in, to the utter surprise and confusion of the lady who was in reality there. After a little explanation, which I can no more describe than fly, I made my retreat from her, convinced of my mistake. She is to all appearance a silly body, and is really surprised about it. She must have been, for I have discovered that a little girl in the house was the rapper. I assure you, she has nearly made me sneeze. If the lady tells tits, I shall put a very grave and moral face on the matter with the old gentleman, and make his little boy a present of a humming top. Monday, September 27. My dear George, this Monday morning, the 27th, I have received your last, dated 12th July. You say you have not heard from England for 3 months. Then my letter from Shanklin, written, I think, at the end of June, has not reached you. You shall not have cause to think I neglect you. I have kept this back a little time in expectation of hearing from Mr. Abbey. You will say I might have remained in town to be Abbey's messenger in these affairs. That I offered him, but he in his answer convinced me that he was anxious to bring the business to an issue. He observed that by being himself the agent in the whole, people might be more expeditious. You say you have not heard for 3 months, and yet your letters have the tone of knowing how our affairs are situated, by which I conjecture I acquainted you with them in a letter previous to the Shanklin one. That I may not have done, to be certain, I will here state that it is in consequence of Mrs. Jennings threatening a chancery suit that you have been kept from the receipt of moneys, and myself deprived of any help from Abbey. I am glad you say you keep up your spirits, I hope you make a true statement on that score. Still keep them up, for we are all young. I can only repeat here that you shall hear from me again immediately, notwithstanding this bad intelligence. I have experienced some pleasure in receiving so correctly 2 letters from you, as it gives me, if I may say so, a distant idea of a proximity. This last improves upon my little niece. Kiss her for me. Do not fret yourself about the delay of money on account of my immediate opportunity being lost. For in a new country, whoever has money must have an opportunity of employing it in many ways. The report runs now more in favor of Kean's stopping in England. If he should, I have confident hopes of our tragedy. If he invokes the hot-blooded character of Ludolf, and he is the only actor that can do it, he will add to his own fame and improve my fortune. I will give you a half-dozen lines of it before I part as a specimen. Not as a swordsman would I pardon crave, but as a son, the bronze centurion, long toiled in foreign wars, and whose high deeds are shaded in a forest of tall spears, known only to his troop, hath greater plea of favour with my sire than I can have. Believe me, my dear brother and sister, your affectionate and anxious brother, John Keats. End of letter 116, Part 2.
Letter 117 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To John Hamilton Reynolds, Winchester, September 22nd, 1819. My dear Reynolds, I was very glad to hear from Woodhouse that you would meet in the country. I hope you will pass some pleasant time together, which I wish to make pleasanter by a brace of letters, very highly to be estimated, as really I have had very bad luck with this sort of game this season. I keepen in solitariness, for Brawne has gone a-visiting. I am surprised myself at the pleasure I live alone in. I can give you no news of the place here, or any other idea of it, but what I have to this effect written to George. Yesterday, I say to him, was a grand day for Winchester. They elected a mayor. It was indeed high time the place should receive some sort of excitement. There was nothing going on, all asleep, not an old maid's sedan returning from a card party, and if any old woman got tipsy at christenings, they did not expose it in the streets. The first night, though, of our arrival here, there was a slight uproar took place at around 10 o'clock. We heard distinctly a noise pattering down the high street as of a walking cane of a good old dowager breed, and a little minute after we heard a less voice observe, "What a noise the ferule made! It must be loose." Brawne wanted to call the constables, but I observed 'twas only a little breeze and would soon pass over. The side streets here are excessively maiden-lady-like, the door-steps always fresh from the flannel. The knockers have a staid, serious, nay, almost awful quietness about them. I never saw so quiet a collection of lions and rams' heads. The doors are most part black, with a little brass handle just above the keyhole, so that in Winchester a man may very quietly shut himself out of his own house. How beautiful the season is now, how fine the air, a temperate sharpness about it, really without joking chaste weather, Diane skies. I never liked stubble fields so much as now. Ay, better than the chilly green of the spring. Somehow a stubble field looks warm, in the same way that some pictures look warm. This struck me so much in my Sunday's walk that I composed upon it. Footnote: the beautiful Ode to Autumn, the draft of which Keats had copied in a letter, unluckily not preserved, written earlier in the same day to Woodhouse. End footnote. I hope you are better employed than in gaping after weather. I have been at different times so happy as not to know what weather it was. No, I will not copy a parcel of verses. I always somehow associate Chatterton with autumn. He is the purest writer in the English language. He has no French idiom or particles like Chaucer. 'Tis genuine English idiom in English words. I have given up Hyperion. There were too many Miltonic inversions in it. Miltonic verse cannot be written but in an artful, or rather artist's humour. I wish to give myself up to other sensations. English ought to be kept up. It may be interesting to you to pick out some lines from Hyperion, and put a mark X to the false beauty proceeding from art, and one pipe to the true voice of feeling. Upon my soul, 'twas imagination. I cannot make the distinction. Every now and then there is a Miltonic intonation, but I cannot make the division properly. The fact is, I must take a walk, for I am writing a long letter to George, and have been employed at it all the morning. You will ask, have I heard from George? I am sorry to say, not the best news. I hope for better. This is the reason, among others, that if I write to you, it must be in such a scrap-like way. I have no meridian to date interests from, or measure circumstances. Tonight I am all in a mist, I scarcely know what's what. But you, knowing my unsteady and vigorous disposition, will guess that all this turmoil will be settled by tomorrow morning. It strikes me tonight that I have led a very odd sort of life for the 2 or 3 last years. Here and there, no anchor. I am glad of it. If you can get a peep at Babbacombe before you leave the country, do. I think it the finest place I have seen or is to be seen in the south. There is a cottage there I took warm water at, that made up for the tea. I have lately shirked some friends of ours, and I advise you to do the same. I mean the Blue Devils. I am never at home to them. You need not fear them while you remain in Devonshire. There will be some of the family waiting for you at the coach office, but go by another coach. I shall beg leave to have a third opinion in the first discussion you have with Woodhouse, just halfway between both. You know I will not give up my argument. In my walk today I stooped under a railing that lay across my path, and asked myself why I did not get over. Because, answered I, no one wanted to force you under. I would give a guinea to be a reasonable man, good sound sense, a says what he thinks and does what he says man, and did not take snuff. They say men near death, however mad they may have been, come to their senses. I hope I shall here in this letter. There is a decent space to be very sensible in. Many a good proverb has been in less. Nay, I have heard of the statutes at large being changed into the statutes at small and printed for a watch paper. Your sisters, by this time, must have got the Devonshire e's. Short e's, you know 'em. They are the prettiest e's in the language. Oh, how I admire the middle-sized, delicate Devonshire girls of about 15. There was one at an inn door holding a quartern of brandy. The very thought of her kept me warm a whole stage. And a 16-miler, too. You'll pardon me for being jocular. Ever your affectionate friend, John Keats. End of letter 117. Letter 118 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Wentworth Dilke, Winchester, Wednesday Eve, September 22nd, 1819. My dear Dilke, whatever I take to for the time, I cannot leave off in a hurry. Letter writing is the go now. I have consumed a quire at least. You must give me credit now for a free letter, when it is in reality an interested one, on 2 points, the one requestive, the other verging to the pros and cons. As I expect they will lead me to seeing and conferring with you in a short time, I shall not enter at all upon a letter I have lately received from George, of not the most comfortable intelligence, but proceed to these 2 points, which if you can theme out into sections and subsections for my edification, you will oblige me. The first I shall begin upon, the other will follow like a tail to a comet. I have written to Brawne on the subject, and can but go over the same ground with you in a very short time, it not being more in length than the ordinary paces between the wickets. It concerns a resolution I have taken to endeavour to acquire something by temporary writing in periodical works. You must agree with me how unwise it is to keep feeding upon hopes, which, depending so much on the state of temper and imagination, appear gloomy or bright, near or afar off, just as it happens. Now, an act has 3 parts, to act, to do, and to perform. I mean, I should do something for my immediate welfare. Even if I am swept away like a spider from a drawing-room, I am determined to spin. Homespun anything for sale. Yea, I will traffic. Anything but mortgage my brain to Blackwood. I am determined not to lie like a dead lump. If Reynolds had not taken to the law, would he not be earning something? Why cannot I? You may say I want tact. That is easily acquired. You may be up to the slaying of a cockpit in 3 battles. It is fortunate I have not before this been tempted to venture on the common. I should, a year or 2 ago, have spoken my mind on every subject with the utmost simplicity. I hope I have learned a little better, and am confident I shall be able to cheat as well as any literary Jew of the market, and shine up an article on anything without much knowledge of the subject, I, like an orange. I would willingly have recourse to other means. I cannot. I am fit for nothing but literature. Wait for the issue of this tragedy? No, there cannot be greater uncertainties east, west, north, and south than concerning dramatic composition. How many months must I wait? Had I not better begin to look about me now? If better events supersede this necessity, what harm will be done? I have no trust whatever on poetry. I don't wonder at it. The marvel is to me how people read so much of it. I think you will see the reasonableness of my plan. To forward it, I purpose living in cheap lodging in town, that I may be in the reach of books and information, of which there is here a plentiful lack. If I can find any place tolerably comfortable, I will settle myself and fag till I can afford to buy pleasure, which, if I can never afford, I must go without. Talking of pleasure, this moment I was writing with one hand, and with the other holding to my mouth a nectarine. Good God, how fine! It went down soft, pulpy, slushy, oozy. All is delicious and embonpoint melted down my throat like a large beatified strawberry. I shall certainly breed. Now, I come to my request. Should you like me for a neighbor again? Come, plump it out, I won't blush. I should also be in the neighborhood of Mrs. Wiley, which I should be glad of, though that, of course, does not influence me. Therefore, will you look about Marsham or Rodney Street for a couple of rooms for me? Rooms like the gallant's legs in Massinger's time. Quote, as good as times allow, sir. I have written today to Reynolds and to Woodhouse. Do you know him? He is a friend of Taylor's, at whom Brawne has taken one of his funny odd dislikes. I'm sure he's wrong, because Woodhouse likes my poetry. Conclusive. I ask your opinion, and yet I must say to you, as to him, Brawne, that if you have anything to say against it, I shall be as obstinate and heady as a radical. By the Examiner coming in your handwriting, you must be in town. They have put me into spirits. Notwithstanding my aristocratic temper, I cannot help being very much pleased with the present public proceedings. I hope sincerely I shall be able to put a mite of help to the liberal side of the question before I die. If you should have left town again, for your holidays cannot be up yet, let me know when this is forwarded to you. A most extraordinary mischance has befallen 2 letters I wrote to Brawne, one from London, whither I was obliged to go on business for George, the other from this place, since my return. I can't make it out. I am excessively sorry for it. I shall hear from Brawne and from you almost together, for I have sent him a letter today. You must positively agree with me, or by the delicate toe-nails of the Virgin I will not open your letters. If they are, as David says, suspicious-looking letters, I won't open them. If St. John had been half as cunning, he might have seen the revelations comfortably in his own room, without giving angels the trouble of breaking open seals. Remember me to Mrs. D. and the West Monasterian, and believe me, ever your sincere friend, John Keats. End of letter 118. Letter 119 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Brawne, Winchester, September 23rd, 1819. Now I am going to enter on the subject of self. It is quite time I should set myself doing something, and live no longer upon hopes. I have never yet exerted myself. I am getting into an idle-minded, vicious way of life, almost content to live upon others. In no period of my life have I acted with any self-will, but in throwing up the apothecary profession. That I do not repent of. Look at Reynolds. If he was not in the law, he would be acquiring, by his abilities, something towards his support. My occupation is entirely literary. I will do so, too. I will write on the liberal side of the question, for whoever will pay me. I have not known yet what it is to be diligent. I purpose living in town, in a cheap lodging, and endeavouring, for a beginning, to get the theatricals of some paper. When I can afford to compose deliberate poems, I will. I shall be in expectation of an answer to this. Look on my side of the question. I am convinced I am right. Suppose the tragedy should succeed, there will be no harm done. And here I will take an opportunity of making a remark or two on our friendship, and on all your good offices to me. I have a natural timidity of mind in these matters, liking better to take the feeling between us for granted than to speak of it. But good God, what a short while you have known me! I feel it a sort of duty to thus recapitulate, however unpleasant it may be to you. You have been living for others more than any man I know. This is a vexation to me, because it has been depriving you, in the very prime of your life, of pleasures which it was your duty to procure. As I am speaking in general terms, this may appear nonsense. You perhaps will not understand it. But if you can go over, day by day, any month of the last year, you will know what I mean. On the whole, however, this is a subject that I cannot express myself upon. I speculate upon it frequently. And believe me, the end of my speculations is always an anxiety for your happiness. This anxiety will not be one of the least incitements to the plan I purpose pursuing. I had got into a habit of mind of looking towards you as a help in all difficulties. This very habit would be the parent of idleness and difficulties. You see, it is a duty I owe myself to break the neck of it. I do nothing for my subsistence, make no exertion. At the end of another year you shall applaud me, not for verses, but for conduct. While I have some immediate cash, I had better settle myself quietly, and fag on as others do. I shall apply to Hazlitt, who knows the market as well as anyone, for something to bring me in a few pounds as soon as possible. I shall not suffer my pride to hinder me. The whisper may go round, I shall not hear it. If I can get an article in the Edinburgh, I will. One must not be delicate, nor let this disturb you longer than a moment. I look forward with a good hope that we shall one day be passing free, untrammelled, unanxious time together. That can never be if I continue a dead lump. I shall be expecting anxiously an answer from you. If it does not arrive in a few days, this will have miscarried, and I shall come straight to, before I go to town, which you, I am sure, will agree had better be done while I still have some ready cash. By the middle of October I shall expect you in London. We will then set at the theatres. If you have anything to gainsay, I shall be even as the deaf adder which stoppeth her ears. End of letter 119. Letter 120 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Brawne. Winchester, September 23rd, 1819. Do not suffer me to disturb you unpleasantly. I do not mean that you should not suffer me to occupy your thoughts, but to occupy them pleasantly, for I assure you I am as far from being unhappy as possible. Imaginary grievances have always been more my torment than real ones. You know this well. Real ones will never have any other effect upon me than to stimulate me to get out of or avoid them. This is easily accounted for. Our imaginary woes are conjured up by our passions, and are fostered by passionate feeling. Our real ones come of themselves, and are opposed by an abstract exertion of mind. Real grievances are displacers of passion. The imaginary nail a man down for a sufferer as on a cross. The real spur him up into an agent. I wish, at one view, you would see my heart towards you. 'Tis only from a high tone of feeling that I can put that word upon paper, out of poetry. I ought to have waited for your answer to my last before I wrote this. I felt, however, compelled to make a rejoinder to yours. I had written to Dilke on the subject of my last. I scarcely know whether I shall send my letter now. I think he would approve of my plan. It is so evident. Nay, I am convinced out and out that by prosing for a while in periodical works, I may maintain myself decently. End of letter 120. Letter 121 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Wentworth Dilke, Winchester, Friday, October 1st, 1819. My dear Dilke, for sundry reasons, which I will explain to you when I come to town, I have to request you will do me a great favor, as I must call it, knowing how great a bore it is. That your imagination may not have time to take too great an alarm, I state immediately that I want you to hire me a couple of rooms, a sitting-room and bedroom for myself alone, in Westminster. Quietness and cheapness are the essentials. But as I shall with Brawne be returned by next Friday, you cannot in that space have sufficient time to make any choice selection, and need not be very particular, as I can, when on the spot, suit myself at leisure. Brawne bids me remind you not to send the examiners after the 3rd. Tell Mrs. D. I am obliged to her for the late ones, which I see are directed in her hand. Excuse this mere business letter, for I assure you I have not a syllable at hand on any subject in the world. Your sincere friend, John Keats. End of letter 121. Letter 122 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Benjamin Robert Haydon, Winchester, Sunday morn, October 3rd, 1819. My dear Haydon, certainly I might, but a few months pass away before we are aware. I have a great aversion to letter writing, which grows more and more upon me, and a greater to summon up circumstances before me of an unpleasant nature. I was not willing to trouble you with them. Could I have dated from my palace of Milan, you would have heard from me. Not even now will I mention a word of my affairs, only that I, Rab, am here, but shall not be here more than a week more, as I purpose to settle in town and work my way with the rest. I hope I shall never be so silly as to injure my health and industry for the future by speaking, writing, or fretting about my non-estate. I have no quarrel, I assure you, of so weighty a nature with the world on my own account as I have on yours. I have done nothing, except for the amusement of a few people who refine upon their feelings till anything in the ununderstandable way will go down with them, people predisposed for sentiment. I have no cause to complain, because I am certain anything really fine will, in these days, be felt. I have no doubt that if I had written Othello, I should have been cheered by as good a mob as Hunt. So would you be now, if the operation of painting was as universal as that of writing. It is not, and therefore it did behove men I could mention, among whom I must place Sir George Beaumont, to have lifted you above sordid cares. That this has not been done is a disgrace to the country. I know very little of painting, yet your pictures follow me into the country. When I am tired of reading, I often think them over and over, and as often condemn the spirit of modern connoisseurs. Upon the whole, indeed, you have no complaint to make. Being able to say what so few men can, I have succeeded. On sitting down to write a few lines to you, these are the uppermost in my mind, and however I may be beating around the Arctic while your spirit has passed the line, you may lay to a minute and consider I am earnest as far as I can see. Though at this present I have great dispositions to write, I feel every day more and more content to read. Books are becoming more interesting and valuable to me. I may say I could not live without them. If in the course of a fortnight you can procure me a ticket to the British Museum, I will make a better use of it than I did in the first instance. I shall go on with patience, in the confidence that if I ever do anything worth remembering, the reviewers will no more be able to stumble-block me than the Royal Academy could you. They have the same quarrel with you that the Scotch nobles had with Wallace. The fame they have lost through you is no joke to them. Had it not been for you, Fuseli would have been not as he is, Major, but Maximus Domo. What reviewers can put a hindrance to must be a nothing, or mediocre, which is worse. I am sorry to say that since I saw you, I have been guilty of a practical joke upon Brawne, which has had all the success of an innocent wildfire among people. Some day in the next week you shall hear it from me by word of mouth. I have not seen the pretentious book, which was scummered at you just as I left town. It may be light enough to serve you as a cork jacket and save you for a while the trouble of swimming. I heard the man went raking and rummaging about like any Richardson. That and the memoirs of Menage are the first I shall be at. From Sir G.B.'s, Lord M.'s, and particularly St. John Leicester's, good Lord deliver us. I shall expect to see your picture plumped out like a ripe peach. You would not be very willing to give me a slice of it. I came to this place in the hopes of meeting with a library, but was disappointed. The High Street is as quiet as a lamb. The knockers are dieted to 3 raps per diem. The walks about are interesting, from the many old buildings and archways. The view of the High Street through the gate of the city and the beautiful September evening light has amused me frequently. The bad singing of the cathedral I do not care to smoke. Being by myself, I am not very coy in my taste. At St. Cross there is an interesting picture of Albert Durer's, who, living in such warlike times, perhaps, was forced to paint in his gauntlets, so we must make all allowances. I am, my dear Haydon, yours ever, John Keats. Brawne has a few words to say to you, and will cross this. End of letter 122. Letter 123 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, October 16th, 1819. My dear Fanny, my conscience is always reproaching me for neglecting you for so long a time. I have been returned from Winchester this fortnight, and as yet I have not seen you. I have no excuse to offer. I should have no excuse. I shall expect to see you the next time I call on Mr. A. about George's affairs, which perplex me a great deal. I should have today gone to see you if you were in town, but as I am in an industrious humour, which is so necessary to my livelihood for the future, I am loath to break through it, though it be merely for one day. For when I am inclined I can do a great deal in a day. I am more fond of pleasure than study. Many men have preferred the latter, but I have become resolved to know something which you will credit, when I tell you that I have left off animal food, that my brains may never henceforth be in a greater mist than is theirs by nature. I took lodgings in Westminster for the purpose of being in the reach of books, but am now returned to Hampstead, being induced to it by the habit I have acquired in this room I am in now, and also from the pleasure of being free from paying any petty attentions to a diminutive housekeeping. Mr. Brawne has been my great friend for some time. Without him I should have been in, perhaps, personal distress. As I know you love me, though I do not deserve it, I am sure you will take pleasure in being a friend to Mr. Brawne, even before you know him. My lodgings for 2 or 3 days were close in the neighbourhood of Mrs. Dilke, who never sees me but she inquires after you. I have had letters from George lately, which do not contain, as I think I told you in my last, the best news. I have hopes for the best. I trust in a good termination to his affairs, which you, please God, will soon hear of. It is better that you should not be teased with the particulars. The whole amount of the ill news is that his mercantile speculations have not had success, in consequence of the general depression of trade in the whole province of Kentucky, and indeed all America. I have a couple of shells for you will call pretty. Your affectionate brother, John Keats. End of letter 123. Letter 124 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Joseph Severn, Wentworth Place, Wednesday, October 27th, 1819. Dear Severn, either your joke about staying at home is a very old one, or I really called. I don't remember doing so. I am glad to hear you have finished the picture, and am more anxious to see it than I have time to spare. For I have been so very lax, unemployed, unmeridianed and objectless these 2 months, that even I grudge indulging, and that is no great indulgence, considering the lecture is not over till 9, and the lecture room 7 miles from Wentworth Place, myself by going to Hazlitt's lecture. If you have hours to the amount of a brace of dozens to throw away, you may sleep 9 of them here in your little crib and chat the rest. When your picture is up and in a good light, I shall make a point of meeting you at the Academy, if you will let me know when. If you should be at the lecture tomorrow evening, I shall see you, and congratulate you heartily. Haslam, I know, is very beadle to an amorous sigh. Your sincere friend, John Keats. End of letter 124. Letter 125 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To John Taylor, Wentworth Place, Hampstead, November 17th, 1819. My dear Taylor, I have come to a determination not to publish anything I have now ready written, but, for all that, to publish a poem before long, and that I hope to make a fine one. As the marvellous is the most enticing and the surest guarantee of harmonious numbers, I have been endeavouring to persuade myself to untether fancy and to let her manage for herself. I and myself cannot agree about this at all. Wonders are no wonders to me. I am more at home amongst men and women. I would rather read Chaucer than Ariosto. The little dramatic skill I may as yet have, however badly it might show in a drama, would, I think, be sufficient for a poem. I wish to diffuse the colouring of St. Agnes' Eve throughout a poem, in which character and sentiment would be the figures to such drapery. 2 or 3 such poems, if God should spare me, written in the course of the next 6 years, would be a famous gradus ad Parnassum altissimum. I mean, they would nerve me up to the writing of a few fine plays, my greatest ambition, when I do feel ambitious. I am sorry to say that is very seldom. The subject we have once or twice talked of appears a promising one, the Earl of Leicester's history. I am this morning reading Holinshed's Elizabeth. You had some books a while ago you promised to send me, illustrative of my subject. If you can lay hold of them, or any others which may be serviceable to me, I know you will encourage my low-spirited muse by sending them, or rather by letting me know where our errand cart man shall call with my little box. I will endeavour to set myself selfishly at work on this poem that is to be. Your sincere friend, John Keats. End of letter 125. Letter 126 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats. Wednesday morn, November 17th, 1819. My dear Fanny, I received your letter yesterday evening and will obey it tomorrow. I would come today, but I have been to town so frequently on George's business it makes me wish to employ today at Hampstead. So I say Thursday without fail. I have no news at all entertaining, and if I had, I should not have time to tell them, as I wish to send this by the morning post. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 126. Letter 127 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Joseph Severn, Wentworth Place, Monday morn, December 6, 1819. My dear Severn, I am very sorry that on Tuesday I have an appointment in the city of an undeferrable nature, and Brawne on the same day has some business at Guildhall. I have not been able to figure your manner of executing the Cave of Despair. Footnote. Spenser's Cave of Despair was the subject of the picture, with which Severn won the Royal Academy Premium, awarded December 10th of this year. End footnote. Therefore it will be at any rate a novelty and surprise to me. I trust on the right side. I shall call upon you some morning shortly, early enough to catch you before you can get out, when we will proceed to the Academy. I think you must be suited with a good painting light in your bay window. I wish you to return the compliment by going with me to see a poem I have hung up for the prize in the lecture room of the Surrey Institution. I have many rivals. The most threatening are an Ode to Lord Castlereagh and a new series of hymns for the New Jerusalem Chapel. You had best put me in your cave of despair. Ever yours sincerely, John Keats. End of letter 127. Letter 128 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To James Rice, Wentworth Place, December 1819. My dear Rice, as I want the coat on my back mended, I would be obliged if you would send me the one Brawne left at your house by the bearer. During your late contest I had regular reports of you, how that your time was completely taken up and your health improving. I shall call in the course of a few days and see whether your promotion has made any difference in your behaviour to us. I suppose Reynolds has given you an account of Brawne and Elliston. As he has not rejected our tragedy, I shall not venture to call him directly a fool, but as he wishes to put it off till next season, I cannot help thinking him little better than a knave. That it will not be acted this season is yet uncertain. Perhaps we may give it another furbish and try it at Covent Garden. 'Twould do one's heart good to see Macready at Ludolph. If you do not see me soon, it will be from the humour of writing, which I have had for 3 days, continuing. I must say to the muses what the maid says to the man, take me while the fit is on me. Ever yours sincerely, John Keats. End of letter 128. Letter 129 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, Monday morn, December 20th, 1819. My dear Fanny, when I saw you last, you asked me whether you should see me again before Christmas. You would have seen me if I had been quite well. I have not, though not unwell enough to have prevented me, not indeed at all, but fearful lest the weather should affect my throat, which on exertion or cold continually threatens me. By the advice of my doctor I have had a warm greatcoat made, and have ordered some thick shoes. So furnished, I shall be with you if it holds a little fine before Christmas Day. I have been very busy since I saw you, especially the last week, and shall be for some time in preparing some poems to come out in the spring, and also in brightening the interest of our tragedy. Of the tragedy I can give you but news semi-good. It is accepted at Drury Lane with the promise of coming out next season. As that will be too long a delay, we have determined to get Elliston to bring it out this season or to transfer it to Covent Garden. This Elliston will not like, as we have every motive to believe that Kean has perceived how suitable the principal character will be for him. My hopes of success in the literary world are now better than ever. Mr. Abbey, on my calling on him lately, appeared anxious that I should apply myself to something else. He mentioned tea brokerage. I supposed he might perhaps mean to give me the brokerage of his concern, which might be executed with little trouble and a good profit, and therefore said I should have no objection to it, especially as at the same time it occurred to me that I might make over the business to George. I questioned him about it a few days after. His mind takes odd turns. When I became a suitor, he became coy. He did not seem so much inclined to serve me. He described what I should have to do in the progress of business. It will not suit me. I have given it up. I have not heard again from George, which rather disappoints me, as I wish to hear before I make any fresh remittance of his property. I received a note from Mrs. Dilke a few days ago, inviting me to dine with her on Christmas Day, which I shall do. Mr. Brawne and I go on in our old dog-trot of breakfast, dinner, not tea, for we have left that off, supper, sleep, confab, stirring the fire, and reading. Whilst I was in the country last summer, Mrs. Bentley tells me, a woman in mourning called on me, and talked something of an aunt of ours. I'm so careless a fellow I did not inquire, but will particularly. On Tuesday I am going to hear some schoolboys speechify on Breaking Up Day. I'll lay you a pocket piece we shall have, My Name is Norval. I have not yet looked for the letter you mentioned, as it is mixed up in a box full of papers. You must tell me, if you can recollect, the subject of it. This moment Bentley brought a letter from George for me to deliver to Mrs. Wiley. I shall see her and it before I see you. The direction was in his best hand, written with a good pen and sealed with a Tassie's Shakespeare, such as I gave you. We judge of people's hearts by their countenances. May we not judge of letters in the same way? If so, the letter does not contain unpleasant news. Good or bad spirits have an effect on the handwriting. This direction is at least unnervous and healthy. Our sister is also well, or George would have made strange work with K's and W's. The little baby is well, or he would have formed precious vowels and consonants. He sent off the letter in a hurry, or the mail-bag was rather a warm berth, or he has worn out his seal, for the Shakespeare's head is flattened a little. This is close, muggy weather, as they say, at the ale-houses. I am ever, my dear sister, yours affectionately, John Keats. End of letter 129. Letter 130 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, Wednesday, December 22nd, 1819. My dear Fanny, I wrote to you a letter, directed Walthamstow the day before yesterday, wherein I promised to see you before Christmas Day. I am sorry to say I have been and continue rather unwell, and therefore shall not be able to promise certainly. I have not seen Mrs. Wiley's letter. Excuse, my dear Fanny, this very shabby note. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 130.
Letter 131 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nemo. To Georgiana Keats, Thursday, January 13, 1820. My dear sister, by the time you receive this, your trouble will be over. I wish you knew they were half over. I mean that George is safe in England and in good health. To write to you by him is almost like following one's own letter in the mail. That it may not be quite so, I will leave common intelligence out of the question, and write wide of him as I can. I fear I must be dull, having had no good-natured flip from fortune's finger since I saw you, and no sideway comfort in the success of my friends. I could almost promise that if I had the means I would accompany George back to America, and pay you a visit of a few months. I should not think much of the time or my absence from my books, or I have no right to think, for I am very idle. But then I ought to be diligent, and at least keep myself within the reach of materials for diligence. Diligence, that I do not mean to say, I should say dreaming over my books, or rather other people's books. George has promised to bring you to England when the 5 years have elapsed. I regret very much that I shall not be able to see you before that time, and even then I must hope that your affairs will be in so prosperous a way as to induce you to stop longer. Yours is a hardish fate, to be so divided among your friends and settled among a people you hate. You will find it improve. You have a heart that will take hold of your children. Even George's absence will make things better. His return will banish what must be your greatest sorrow, and at the same time minor ones with it. Robinson Crusoe, when he saw himself in danger of perishing on the waters, looked back to his island as to the haven of his happiness, and on gaining it once more, was more content with his solitude. We smoke George about his little girl. He runs the common beaten road of every father, as I dare say you do of every mother. There is no child like his child, so original. Original, forsooth. However, I take you at your words. I have a lively faith that yours is the very gem of all children. Ain't I its uncle? On Henry's marriage there was a piece of bride cake sent me. It missed its way. I suppose the carrier coachman was a conjurer, and wanted it for his own private use. Last Sunday George and I dined at Millar's. There were your mother, and Charles with Fool Lacon, Esquire, who sent the sly, disinterested Shaw to Miss Millar, with his own heathen name engraved in the middle. Charles had a silk handkerchief belonging to Miss Grover, with whom he pretended to be smitten, and for her sake kept exhibiting and adoring the handkerchief all the evening. Fool Lacon, Esquire, treated it with a little venturesome, trembling contumely, whereupon Charles set him quietly down on the floor, from where he as quietly got up. This process was repeated at supper time, when your mother said, "If I were you, Mr. Lacon, I would not let him do so." Fool Lacon, Esquire, did not offer any remark. He will undoubtedly die in his bed. Your mother did not look quite so well on Sunday. Mrs. Henry Wiley is excessively quiet before people. I hope she is always so. Yesterday we dined at Taylor's in Fleet Street. George left early after dinner to go to Deptford. He will make all square there for me. I could not go with him. I did not like the amusement. Haslam is a very good fellow indeed. He has been excessively anxious and kind to us. But is this fair? He has an inamorata at Deptford, and he has been wanting me for some time past to see her. This is a thing which it is impossible not to shirk. A man is like a magnet. He must have a repelling end. So how am I to see Haslam's lady and family, if I even went? For by the time I got to Greenwich, I should have repelled them to Blackheath, and by the time I got to Deptford, they would be on Shooter's Hill. When I came to Shooter Hill, they would alight at Chatham, and so on, till I drove them into the sea, which I think might be indictable. The evening before yesterday, we had a pianoforte hop at Dilke's. There was very little amusement in the room, but a Scotchman to hate. Some people, you must have observed, have a most unpleasant effect upon you when you see them speaking in profile. The Scotchman is the most accomplished fellow in this way I ever met with. The effect was complete. It went down like a dose of bitters, and I hope will improve my digestion. At Taylor's, too, there was a Scotchman, not quite so bad, for he was as clean as he could get himself. Not having succeeded in Drury Lane with our tragedy, we have been making some alterations, and are about to try Covent Garden. Brawne has just done patching up the copy, as it is altered. The reliance I had on it was in Keane's acting. I'm not afraid it will be damned in the garden. You said in one of your letters that there was nothing but Haydon and company in mine. There can be nothing of him in this, for I never see him or company. George has introduced us to an American of the name of Hart. I like him in a moderate way. He was at Mrs. Dilke's party, and sitting by me. We began talking about English and American ladies. The Miss Blank and some of their friends made a not very enticing row opposite us. I bade him mark them and form his judgment of them. I told him I hated Englishmen because they were the only men I knew. He does not understand this. Who would be braggadocio to Johnny Bull? Johnny's house is his castle, and a precious dull castle it is. What a many Bull castles there are in so and so Crescent. I never wish myself an unversed writer and newsmonger, but when I write to you. I should like for a day or two to have somebody's knowledge, Mr. Lacon's, for instance, of all the different folks of a wide acquaintance to tell you about. Only let me have his knowledge of family minutiae, and I would set them in a proper light. But bless me, I never go anywhere. My pen is no more garrulous than my tongue. Any third person would think I was addressing myself to a lover of scandal, but we know we do not love scandal, but fun. And if scandal happens to be fun, that is no fault of ours. There were very good pickings for me in George's letters about the prairie settlement. If I had any taste to turn them to account in England, I knew a friend of Miss Andrews, yet I never mentioned her to him, for after I had read the letter I really did not recollect her story. Now I have been sitting here half an hour with my invention at work to say something about your mother or Charles or Henry, but it is in vain. I know not what to say. 3 nights since, George went with your mother to the play. I hope she will soon see mine acted. I do not remember ever to have thanked you for your tassels to my Shakespeare. There he hangs, so ably supported opposite me. I thank you now. It is a continual memento of you. If you should have a boy, do not christen him John, and persuade George not to let his partiality for me come across. 'Tis a bad name, and goes against a man. If my name had been Edmund, I should have been more fortunate. I was surprised to hear of the state of society at Louisville. It seems to me you are just as ridiculous there as we are here. 3-penny parties, halfpenny dances. The best thing I've heard of is your shooting, for it seems you follow the gun. Give my compliments to Mrs. Audubon, and tell her I cannot think her either good-looking or honest. Tell Mr. Audubon he's a fool, and Briggs that 'tis well I was not Mr. A. Saturday, January 15. It is strange that George, having to stop so short a time in England, I should not have seen him for nearly 2 days. He has been to Haslam's, and does not encourage me to follow his example. He had given promise to dine with the same party tomorrow, but he has sent an excuse which I am glad of, as we shall have a pleasant party with us tomorrow. We expect Charles here today. This is a beautiful day. I hope you will not quarrel with it if I call it an American one. The sun comes upon the snow, and makes a prettier candy than we have on Twelfth Night cakes. George is busy this morning in making copies of my verses. He is making one now of an ode to the nightingale, which is like reading an account of the Black Hole at Calcutta on an iceberg. You will say this is a matter of course. I am glad it is. I mean that I should like your brothers more the more I know them. I should spend much more time with them if our lives are more run in parallel, but we can talk but on one subject, that is you. The more I know of men, the more I know how to value entire liberality in any of them. Thank God, there are a great many who will sacrifice their worldly interests for a friend. I wish there were more who would sacrifice their passions. The worst of men are those whose self-interest are their passion. The next, those whose passions are their self-interest. Upon the whole, I dislike mankind. Whatever people on the other side of the question may advance, they cannot deny that they are always surprised at hearing of a good action, and never of a bad one. I am glad you have something to like in America. Doves. Gertrude of Wyoming and Birkbeck's book should be bound up together like a brace of decoy ducks. One is almost as poetical as the other. Precious miserable people at the prairie. I have been sitting in the sun whilst I wrote this till it's become quite oppressive. This is very odd for January. The Vulcan fire is the true natural heat for winter. The sun has nothing to do in winter but to give a little glooming light much like a shade. Our Irish servant has piqued me this morning by saying that her father in Ireland was very much like my Shakespeare, only he had more colour than the engraving. You will find on George's return that I have not been neglecting your affairs. The delay was unfortunate, not faulty. Perhaps by this time you have received my last 3 letters, not one of which had reached before George sailed. I would give 2pence to have been over the world as much as he has. I wish I had money enough to do nothing but travel about for years. Were you now in England, I dare say you would be able, setting aside the pleasure you would have in seeing your mother, to suck out more amusement for society than I am able to do. To me, it is all as dull here as Louisville could be. I am tired of the theatres. Almost all the parties I may chance to fall into, I know by heart. I know the different styles of talk in different places, what subjects will be started, how it will proceed like an acted play, from the first to the last act. If I go to Hunt's, I run my head into many tunes heard before, old puns and old music, to Haydon's worn-out discourses of poetry and painting. The Miss I am afraid to speak to, for fear of some sickly reiteration of phrase or sentiment. When they were at the dance the other night, I tried manfully to sit near and talk to them, but to no purpose, and if I had, it would have been to no purpose still. My question or observation must have been an old one, and the rejoinder very antique indeed. At Dilke's I fall foul of politics. 'Tis best to remain aloof from people, and like their good parts, without being eternally troubled with the dull process of their everyday lives. When once a person has smoked the vapidness of the routine of society, he must either have self-interest or the love of some sort of distinction to keep him in good humour with it. All I can say is that, standing at Charing Cross and looking east, west, north, and south, I can see nothing but dullness. I hope while I am young to live retired in the country. When I grow in years and have a right to be idle, I shall enjoy cities more. If the American ladies are worse than the English, they must be very bad. You say you should like your Emily brought up here. You had better bring her up yourself. You know a good number of English ladies. What encomium could you give a half-dozen of them? The greater part seem to me downright American. I have known more than one Mrs. Audubon. Her affectation of fashion and politeness cannot transcend ours. Look at our Cheapside tradesmen's sons and daughters, only fit to be taken off by a plague. I hope now soon to come to the time when I shall never be forced to walk through the city and hate as I walk. Monday, January 17. George had a quick rejoinder to his letter of excuse to Haslam, so we had not his company yesterday, which I was sorry for, as there was our old set. I know 3 witty people, all distinct in their excellence, Rice, Reynolds, and Richards. Rice is the wisest, Reynolds the playfullest, Richards the out-of-the-wayest. The first makes you laugh and think. The second makes you laugh and not think. The third puzzles your head. I admire the first, I enjoy the second, I stare at the third. The first is claret, the second ginger beer, the third creme de barapamjag. The first is inspired by Minerva, the second by Mercury, the third by Harlequin Epigram Esquire. The first is neat in his dress, the second slovenly, the third uncomfortable. The first speaks adagio, the second allegretto, the third both together. The first is Swiftian, the second Tom Cribbian, the third Shandean. And yet these 3 Ians are not 3 Ians, but 1 Ian. Charles came on Saturday, but went early. He seems to have schemes and plans and wants to get off. He is quite right. I am glad to see him employed at business. You remember I wrote you a story about a woman named Alice being made young again, or some such stuff. In your next letter, tell me whether I gave it as my own, or whether I gave it as a matter Brawne was employed upon at the time. He read it over to George the other day, and George said he had heard it all before. So Brawne suspects I have been giving you his story as my own. I should like to set him right in it by your evidence. George has not returned from town. When he does, I shall tax his memory. We had a young, long, raw, lean Scotchman with us yesterday, called Thornton. Rice, for fun or for mistake, would persist in calling him Stevenson. I know 3 people of no wit at all, each distinct in his excellence, A, B, and C. A is the foolishest, B is the sulkiest, C is a negative. A makes you yawn, B makes you hate. As for C, you never see him at all, though he were 6 feet high. I bear the first, I forbear the second. I am not certain that the third is. The first is gruel, the second ditch-water, the third is spilt. He ought to be wiped up. A is inspired by Jack of the Clock, B has been drilled by a Russian sergeant, C, they say, is not his mother's true child, but she bought him of the man who cries, young lambs to sell. Twang dillo dee. This, you must know, is the amen to nonsense. I know a good many places where amen should be scratched out. rubbed over with a ponce made of Momo's little finger bones, and in its place twang dillo dee written. This is the word I shall be tempted to write at the end of most modern poems. Every American book ought to have it. It would be a good distinction in society. My Lords Wellington and Castlereagh and Canning, and many more, would do well to wear twang dillo dee on their backs instead of ribbons at their buttonholes. How many people would go sideways along walls and quickset hedges to keep their twang dillo dee out of sight, or wear large pigtails to hide it? However, there would be so many that the twang dillo dees would keep one another in countenance, which Brawne cannot do for me. I have fallen away lately. Thieves and murderers would gain rank in the world, for would any of them have the poorness of spirit to condescend to be a twang dillo dee? I have robbed many a dwelling house, I have killed many a fowl, many a goose, and many a man, would such a gentleman say. But thank heaven, I was never yet a twang dillo dee. Some philosophers in the moon, who spy at our globe as we do at theirs, say that twang dillo dee is written in large letters on our globe of earth. They say the beginning of the T is just on the spot where London stands. London being built within the flourish, Wan reaches downward, and slants as far as Timbuktu in Africa. The tail of the G goes slap across the Atlantic into the Rio de la Plata. The remainder of the letters wrap around New Holland, and the last E terminates in land we have not yet discovered. However, I must be silent. These are dangerous times to libel a man in, much more world. Friday, 27, for 28th January, 1820. I wish you would call me names. I deserve them so much. I've only written 2 sheets for you, to carry by George, and those I forgot to bring to town, and have therefore to forward them to Liverpool. George went this morning at 6 o'clock by the Liverpool coach. His being on his journey to you prevents my regretting his short stay. I have no news of any sort to tell you. Henry is wife-bound in Camden Town. There is no getting him out. I am sorry he has not a prettier wife. Indeed, 'tis a shame. She is not half a wife. I think I could find some of her relations in Buffon, or Captain Cook's Voyages, or the hieroglyphics in Moore's Almanac, or upon a Chinese clock door, the shepherdesses on her own mantelpiece, or in a cruel sampler in which she may find herself worsted, or in a Dutch toy-shop window, or one of the daughters in the Ark, or any picture-shop window. As I intend to retire into the country, where there will be no sort of news, I shall not be able to write you very long letters. Besides, I am afraid the postage comes to too much, which till now I have not been aware of. People in military bands are generally seriously occupied. None may or can laugh at their work but the kettle-drum, long-drum, do triangle and cymbals. Thinking you might want a rat-catcher, I put your mother's old Quaker-colored cat into the top of your bonnet. She's with kitten, so you may expect to find a whole family. I hope the family will not grow too large for its lodging. I shall send you a close-written sheet on the 1st of next month, but for fear of missing the Liverpool post, I must finish here. God bless you and your little girl. Your affectionate brother, John Keats. End of letter 131.
Letter 132 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats. Wentworth Place, Sunday morning, February 6, 1820. My dear sister, I should not have sent those letters without some notice if Mr. Brawne had not persuaded me against it, on account of an illness with which I was attacked on Thursday. Footnote: hemorrhage from the lungs, in which Keats recognized his death warrant, and after which the remainder of his life was but that of a doomed invalid. End footnote. After that I was resolved not to write till I should be on the mending hand, Thank God, I am now so. From imprudently leaving off my great coat in the thaw, I caught a cold which flew to my lungs. Every remedy that has been applied has taken the desired effect, and I have nothing now to do but to stay within doors for some time. If I should be confined long, I shall write to Mr. Abbey to ask permission for you to visit me. George has been running great chance of a similar attack, but I hope the sea air will be his physician in case of illness. The air out at sea is always more temperate than on land. George mentioned in his letters to us something of Mr. Abbey's regret concerning the silence kept up in his house. It is entirely the fault of his manner. You must be careful always to wear warm clothing, not only in frost, but in a thaw. I have no news to tell you. The half-built houses opposite us stand just as they were and seem dying of old age before they are brought up. The grass looks very dingy, the celery is all gone, and there is nothing to enliven one but a few cabbage stalks that seem fixed on the superannuated list. Mrs. Dilke has been ill, but is better. Several of my friends have been to see me. Mrs. Reynolds was here this morning, and the two Mr. Wileys. Brawne has been very alert about me, though a little wheezy himself this weather. Everybody is ill. Yesterday evening Mr. Davenport, a gentleman of Hampstead, sent me an invitation to supper, instead of his coming to see us, having so bad a cold he could not stir out. So, you see, 'tis the weather, and I am among 1,000. Whenever you have an inflammatory fever, never mind about eating. The day on which I was getting ill I felt this fever to a great height, and therefore almost entirely abstained from food the whole day. I have no doubt experienced a benefit from so doing. The papers I see are full of anecdotes of the late king, how he nodded to a coal heaver and laughed with a Quaker, and liked a boiled leg of mutton. Old Peter Pindar is just dead. What will the old king and he say to each other? Perhaps the king may confess that Peter was in the right, and Peter maintain himself to have been wrong. You shall hear from me again on Tuesday. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 132. Letter 133 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats. Wentworth Place, Tuesday morn, February 8th, 1820. My dear Fanny, I had a slight return of fever last night, which terminated favorably, and I am now tolerably well, though weak from the small quantity of food to which I am obliged to confine myself. I am sure a mouse would starve upon it. Mrs. Wiley came yesterday. I have a very pleasant room for a sick person. A sofa bed is made up for me in the front parlour, which looks on to the grass plot, as you remember Mrs. Dilke's does. How much more comfortable than a dull room upstairs, where one gets tired of the pattern of the bed-curtains. Besides, I see all that passes. For instance, now, this morning, if I had been in my own room, I should not have seen the coals brought in. On Sunday, between the hours of 12 and 1, I descried a pot-boy. I conjectured it might be the 1 o'clock beer. Old women with bobbins and red cloaks and unpresuming bonnets I see creeping about the heath. Gypsies after hareskins and silver spoons. Then goes by a fellow with a wooden clock under his arm that strikes 100 and more. Then comes the old French emigrant, who has been very well-to-do in France, with his hands joined behind on his hips, and his face full of political schemes. Then passes Mr. David Lewis, a very good-natured, good-looking old gentleman who has been very kind to Tom and George and me. As for those fellows, the brickmakers, they are always passing to and fro. I mustn't forget the 2 old maiden ladies in Wellwalk, who have a lap-dog between them that they are very anxious about. It is a corpulent little beast whom it is necessary to coax along with an ivory-tipped cane. Carlo, our neighbour Mrs. Brown's dog, and it meet sometimes. Lappy thinks Carlo a devil of a fellow, and so do his mistresses. Well they may, he would sweep 'em all down at a run, all for the joke of it. I shall desire him to peruse the Fable of the Boys and the Frogs, though he prefers the tongues and the bones. You shall hear from me again the day after tomorrow. Your affectionate brother, John Keats. End of letter 133. Letter 134 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats. Wentworth Place, February 11th, 1820. My dear Fanny, I am much the same as when I last wrote. I hope a little more verging towards improvement. Yesterday morning being very fine, I took a walk for 1/4 of an hour in the garden and was very much refreshed by it. You must consider no news good news if you do not hear from me the day after tomorrow. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 134. Letter 135 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats. Wentworth Place, Monday morn, February 14th, 1820. My dear Fanny, I am improving, but very gradually, and suspect it will be a long while before I shall be able to walk 6 miles. The sun appears half inclined to shine. If he obliges us, I shall take a turn in the garden this morning. No one from town has visited me since my last. I have had so many presents of jam and jellies that they would reach side by side the length of the sideboard. I hope I shall be well before it is all consumed. I am vexed that Mr. Abbey will not allow you pocket money sufficient. He has not behaved well. By detaining money from me and George, when we most wanted it, he has increased our expenses. In consequence of such delay, George was obliged to take his voyage to England, which will be £150 out of his pocket. I enclose you a note. You shall hear from me again the day after tomorrow. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 135. Letter 136 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To James Rice. Wentworth Place, February 16th, 1820. My dear Rice, I have not been well enough to make any tolerable rejoinder to your kind letter. I will, as you advise, be very chary of my health and spirits. I am sorry to hear of your relapse and hypochondriac symptoms attending it. Let us hope for the best, as you say. I shall follow your example in looking to the future good rather than brooding upon the present ill. I have not been so worn with lengthened illnesses as you have, therefore cannot answer you on your own ground with respect to those haunting and deformed thoughts and feelings you speak of. When I have been, or supposed myself in health, I have had my share of them, especially within the last year. I may say that for 6 months before I was taken ill, I had not passed a tranquil day. Either that gloom overspread me, or I was suffering under some passionate feeling, or if I turned to versify, that acerbated the poison of either sensation. The beauties of nature had lost their power over me. How astonishingly, here I must premise that illness, as far as I can judge in so short a time, has relieved my mind of a load of deceptive thoughts and images, and makes me perceive things in a truer light. How astonishingly does the chance of leaving the world impress a sense of its natural beauties upon us. Like poor Falstaff, though I do not babble, I think of green fields. I muse with the greatest affection on every flower I have known from my infancy. Their shapes and colors are as new to me as if I had just created them with a superhuman fancy. It is because they are connected with the most thoughtless and the happiest moments of our lives. I have seen foreign flowers in hothouses, of the most beautiful nature, but I do not care a straw for them. The simple flowers of our spring are what I want to see again. Brawne has left the inventive and taken to the imitative art. He is doing his forte, which is copying Hogarth's heads. He has just made a purchase of the Methodist meeting picture, which gave me a horrid dream a few nights ago. I hope I shall sit under the trees with you again in some such place as the Isle of Wight. I do not mind a game of cards in a saw-pit or wagon, but if you ever catch me on a stagecoach in the winter full against the wind, bring me down with a brace of bullets, and I promise not to peach. Remember me to Reynolds, and say how much I should like to hear from him, that Brawne returned immediately after he went on Sunday, and that I was vexed at forgetting to ask him to lunch, for as he went towards the gate, I saw he was fatigued and hungry. I am, my dear Rice, ever most sincerely yours, John Keats. I have broken this open to let you know I was surprised at seeing it on the table this morning, thinking it had gone long ago. End of letter 136. Letter 137 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, February 19th, 1820. My dear Fanny, being confined almost entirely to vegetable food, and the weather being at the same time so much against me, I cannot say I have much improved since I wrote last. The doctor tells me there are no dangerous symptoms about me, and quietness of mind and fine weather will restore me. Mind my advice to be very careful to wear warm clothing in a thaw. I will write again on Tuesday, when I hope to send you good news. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 137. Letter 138 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To John Hamilton Reynolds, February 23rd or 25th, 1820. My dear Reynolds, I have been improving since you saw me. My nights are better, which I think is a very encouraging thing. You mention your cold and rather too sliding a manner. If you travel outside, have some flannel against the wind, which I hope will not keep on at this rate when you are in a packet boat. Should it rain, do not stop upon deck, though the passengers should vomit themselves inside out. Keep under hatches from all sorts of wet. I am pretty well provided with books at present. When you return, I may give you a commission or two. Mr. B.C. has sent me not only his Sicilian story, but yesterday his dramatic scenes. This is very polite, and I shall do what I can to make him sensible. I think so. I confess they tease me. They are composed of amiability, the seasons, the leaves, the moons, etc., upon which he rings, according to Hunt's expression, triple bob majors. However, that is nothing. I think he likes poetry for its own sake, not his. I hope I shall soon be well enough to proceed with my fairies and set you about the notes on Sundays and stray days. If I had been well enough, I should have liked to cross the water with you. Brawne wishes you a pleasant voyage. Have fish for dinner at the seaports, and don't forget a bottle of claret. You will not meet with so much to hate at Brussels as at Paris. Remember me to all my friends. If I were well enough, I would paraphrase an ode of Horace's for you, on your embarking in the 70 years ago style. The packet will bear a comparison with a Roman galley, at any rate. Ever yours affectionately, J. Keats. End of letter 138. Letter 139 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, Thursday, February 24th, 1820. My dear Fanny, I am sorry to hear you have been so unwell. Now you are better. Keep so. Remember to be very careful of your clothing. This climate requires the utmost care. There has been very little alteration in me lately. I am much the same as when I wrote last. When I am well enough to return to my old diet, I shall get stronger. If my recovery should be delayed long, I will ask Mr. Abbey to let you visit me. Keep up your spirits as well as you can. You shall hear soon again from me. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 139. Letter 140 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Wentworth Dilke, Hampstead, March 4th, 1820. My dear Dilke, since I saw you, I have been gradually, too gradually, perhaps, improving, and though under an interdict with respect to animal food, living upon pseudo-victuals, Brawne says I have picked up a little flesh lately. If I can keep off inflammation for the next 6 weeks, I trust I shall do very well. You certainly should have been at Martin's dinner, for making an index is surely as dull work as engraving. Have you heard that the bookseller is going to tie himself to the manger, eat or not as he pleases? He says Rice shall have his foot on the fender notwithstanding. Reynolds is going to sail on the salt seas. Brawne has been mightily progressing with his Hogarth. A damned melancholy picture it is, and during the first week of my illness it gave me a psalm-singing nightmare that made me almost faint away in my sleep. I know I am better, for I can bear the picture. I have experienced a specimen of great politeness from Mr. Barry Cornwall. He has sent me his books. Some time ago he had given his first published book to Hunt for me. Hunt forgot to give it, and Barry Cornwall, thinking I had received it, must have thought me a very neglectful fellow. Notwithstanding, he sent me his second book, and on my explaining that I had not received the first, he sent me that also. I am sorry to see by Mrs. D.'s note that she has been so unwell with the spasms. Does she continue the medicines that benefited her so much? I am afraid not. Remember me to her, and say I shall not expect her at Hampstead next week unless the weather changes for the warmer. It is better to run no chance of a supernumerary cold in March. As for you, you must come. You must improve in your penmanship. Your writing is like the speaking of a child of 3 years old, very understandable to its father, but to no one else. The worst of it looks well. No, that is not the worst. The worst is, it is worse than Bailey's. Bailey's looks illegible, and may perchance be read. Yours looks very legible, and may perchance not be read. I would endeavour to give you a facsimile of your word Thistlewood, if I were not minded on the instant that Lord Chesterfield had done some such thing to his son. Now I would not bathe in the same river with Lord C., though I had the upper hand of the stream. I am grieved that in writing and speaking it is necessary to make use of the same particles as he did. Cobbett is expected to come in. Oh, that I had 2 double plumpers for him. The ministry are not so inimical to him, but it would like to put him out of Coventry. Casting my eye on the other side, I see a long word written in a most vile manner, unbecoming a critic. You must recollect, I have served no apprenticeship to old plays. If the only copies of the Greek and Latin authors had been made by you, Bailey, and Haydon, they were as good as lost. It has been said that the character of a man may be known by his handwriting. If the character of the age may be known by the average goodness of said, what a slovenly age we live in! Look at Queen Elizabeth's Latin exercises, and blush. Look at Milton's hand. I can't say a word for Shakespeare's. Your sincere friend, John Keats. End of letter 140. Letter 141 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, March 20th, 1820. My dear Fanny, according to your desire, I write today. It must be but a few lines, for I have been attacked several times with a palpitation at the heart, and the doctor says I must not make the slightest exertion. I am much the same today as I have been for a week past. They say 'tis nothing but debility, and will entirely cease on my recovery of my strength, which is the object of my present diet. As the doctor will not suffer me to write, I shall ask Mr. Brawne to let you hear news of me for the future, if I should not get stronger soon. I hope I shall be well enough to come and see your flowers in bloom. Ever your most affectionate brother, John. End of letter 141. Letter 142 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, April 1, 1820. My dear Fanny, I am getting better every day, and should think myself quite well, were I not reminded every now and then by faintness and a tightness in the chest. Send your spaniel over to Hampstead, for I think I know where to find a master or mistress for him. You may depend upon it, if you were even to turn it loose in the common road, it would soon find an owner. If I keep improving as I have done, I shall be able to come over to you in a course of a few weeks. I should take the advantage of your being in town, but I cannot bear the city. although I have already ventured as far as the West End for the purpose of seeing Mr. Haydon's picture, which is just finished and has made its appearance. I have not heard from George yet since he left Liverpool. Mr. Brawne wrote to him as from me the other day. Mr. B wrote 2 letters to Mr. Abbey concerning me. Mr. A took no notice, and of course Mr. B must give up such a correspondence when, as the man said, all the letters are on one side. I write with greater ease than I had thought, therefore you shall soon hear from me again. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 142. Letter 143 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, April 1820. My dear Fanny, Mr. Brawne is waiting for me to take a walk. Mrs. Dilke is on a visit next door and desires her love to you. The dog shall be taken care of, and for his name I shall go and look in the parish register where he was born. I still continue on the mending hand. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 143. Letter 144 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, April 12, 1820. My dear Fanny, excuse these shabby scraps of paper I send you, and also from endeavouring to give you any consolation just at present, for though my health is tolerably well, I am too nervous to enter into any discussion in which my heart is concerned. Wait patiently and take care of your health, being especially careful to keep yourself from low spirits, which are great enemies to health. You are young, and have only need of a little patience. I am not yet able to bear the fatigue of coming to Walthamstow, though I have been to town once or twice. I have thought of taking a change of air. You shall hear from me immediately on my moving anywhere. I will ask Mrs. Dilke to pay you a visit, if the weather holds fine, the first time I see her. The dog is being attended to like a prince. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 144. Letter 145 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Hampstead, April 21st, 1820. My dear Fanny, I have been slowly improving since I wrote last. The doctor assures me that there's nothing the matter with me except nervous irritability and a general weakness of the whole system, which has proceeded from my anxiety of mind of late years and the too great excitement of poetry. Mr. Brawne is going to Scotland by the smack, and I am advised for change of exercise and air to accompany him and give myself the chance of benefit from a voyage. Mr. H. Wiley called on me yesterday with a letter from George to his mother. George is safe at the other side of the water, perhaps by this time arrived at his home. I wish you were coming to town, that I might see you. If you should be coming, write to me, as it is quite a trouble to get by the coaches to Walthamstow. Should you not come to town, I must see you before I sail, at Walthamstow. They tell me I must study lines and tangents and squares and angles to put a little ballast into my mind. We shall be going in a fortnight, and therefore you will see me within that space. I expected sooner, but I have not been able to venture to walk across the country. Now the fine weather is come, you will not find your time so irksome. You must be sensible how much I regret not being able to alleviate the unpleasantness of your situation. But trust, my dear Fanny, that better times are in wait for you. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 145. Letter 146 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, Thursday, May 4th, 1820. My dear Fanny, I went for the first time into the city the day before yesterday, for before I was very disinclined to encounter the scuffle, more from nervousness than real illness, which, notwithstanding, I should not have suffered to conquer me, if I had not made up my mind not to go to Scotland, but to remove to Kentish Town till Mr. Brawne returns. Kentish Town is a mile nearer to you than Hampstead. I have been getting gradually better, but am not so well as to trust myself to the casualties of rain and sleeping out which I am liable to in visiting you. Mr. Brawne goes on Saturday, and by that time I shall have settled into my new lodging, when I will certainly venture to you. You will forgive me, I hope, when I confess that I endeavour to think of you as little as possible, and to let George dwell upon my mind but slightly, the reason being that I am afraid to ruminate on anything which has the shade of difficulty or melancholy in it, as that sort of cogitation is so pernicious to health, and it is only by health that I can be enabled to alleviate your situation in future. For some time you must do what you can of yourself for relief, and bear your mind up with the consciousness that your situation cannot last forever, and that for the present you may console yourself against the reproaches of Mrs. Abbey. Whatever obligations you may have had to her, you have none now, as she has reproached you. I do not know what property you have, but I will inquire into it. Be sure, however, that beyond the obligation that a lodger may have to a landlord, you have none to Mrs. Abbey. Let the surety of this make you laugh at Mrs. A.'s foolish tattle. Mrs. Dilke's brother has got your dog. She is now very well, still liable to illness. I will get her to come and see you if I can make up my mind on the propriety of introducing a stranger into Abby's house. Be careful to let no fretting injure your health, as I have suffered it. Health is the greatest of blessings. With health and hope we should be content to live. And so you will find as you grow older. I am, my dear Fanny, your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 146. Letter 147 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Wentworth Dilke, Hampstead, May 1820. My dear Dilke, as Brawne is not to be a fixture at Hampstead, I have at last made up my mind to send home all lent books. I should have seen you before this, but my mind has been at work all over the world to find out what to do. I have my choice of 3 things, or at least 2, South America or surgeon to an Indiaman, which last, I think, will be my fate. I shall resolve in a few days. Remember me to Mrs. D. and Charles and your father and mother. Ever truly yours, John Keats. End of letter 147. Letter 148 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To John Taylor, Wesleyan Place, Kentish Town, June 11th, 1820. My dear Taylor, in reading over the proof of St. Agnes' Eve since I left Fleet Street, I was struck with what appears to me an alteration in the 7th stanza very much for the worse. The passage I mean stands thus. Her maiden eyes incline still on the floor, while many a sweeping train pass by. 'Twas originally written, her maiden eyes divine fixed on the floor, saw many a sweeping train pass by. My meaning is quite destroyed in the alteration. I do not use train for concourse of passers-by, but for skirts sweeping along the floor. In the first stanza my copy reads, 2nd line, bitter chill it was, to avoid the echo cold in the 2nd line. Ever yours sincerely, John Keats. End of letter 148. Letter 149 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Brawne, Wesleyan Place, Kentish Town, June 1820. My dear Brawne, I have only been to Blank's once since you left, when Blank could not find your letters. Now this is bad of me. I should, in this instance, conquer the great aversion to breaking up my regular habits, which grows upon me more and more. True, I have an excuse in the weather, which drives one from shelter to shelter in any little excursion. I have not heard from George, My book is coming out with very low hopes, though not spirits, on my part. This shall be my last trial. Not succeeding, I shall try what I can do in the apothecary line. When you hear from me, or see blank, it is probable you will hear some complaints against me, which this notice is not intended to forestall. The fact is, I did behave badly, but it is to be attributed to my health, spirits, and the disadvantageous ground I stand on in society. I could go and accommodate matters if I were not too weary of the world. I know they are more happy and comfortable than I am, therefore why should I trouble myself about it? I foresee I shall know very few people in the course of a year or two. Men get such different habits that they become as oil and vinegar to one another. Thus far I have a consciousness of having been pretty dull and heavy, both in subject and phrase. I might add, enigmatical. I am in the wrong, and the world is in the right, I have no doubt. Fact is, I have had so many kindnesses done me by so many people that I am chevaux de frise with benefits, which I must jump over or break down. I met in town a few days ago, who invited me to supper to meet Wordsworth, Southey, Lamb, Haydon, and some more. I was too careful of my health to risk being out at night. Talking of that, I continue to improve slowly, but I think surely. There's a famous exhibition in Pall Mall of the old English portraits by Van Dyck and Holbein, Sir Peter Lely, and the great Sir Godfrey. Pleasant countenances predominate, so I will mention 2 or 3 unpleasant ones. There is James I, whose appearance would disgrace a society for the suppression of women, so very squalid and subdued to nothing he looks. Then there is old Lord Burleigh, the high priest of economy, the political save-all, who has the appearance of a Pharisee just rebuffed by a gospel bon mot. Then there is George II, very like an unintellectual Voltaire, troubled with the gout and a bad temper. Then there is young Devereux, the favourite, with every appearance of as slang a boxer as any in the court. His face is cast in the mould of blackguardism with jockey plaster. I shall soon begin upon Lucy Vaughan Lloyd. Footnote: the Cap and Bells was to have appeared under the pseudonym. End footnote. I do not begin composition yet, being willing, in case of a relapse, to have nothing to reproach myself with. I hope the weather will give you the slip. Let it show itself and steal out of your company. When I have sent off this, I shall write another to some place about 50 miles in advance of you. Good morning to you. Yours ever sincerely, John Keats. End of letter 149. Letter 150 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats. Friday morn, Wesleyan Place, Kentish Town, June 26, 1820. My dear Fanny, I had intended to delay seeing you till a book which I am now publishing was out. Footnote: the volume containing Lamia, Isabella, the Eve of St. Agnes, Hyperion, and the Odes. End footnote. Expecting that to be the end of this week, when I would have brought it to Walthamstow. On receiving your letter, of course, I set myself to come to town, but was not able, for just as I was setting out yesterday morning, a slight spitting of blood came on, which returned rather more copiously at night. I have slept well, and they tell me there is nothing material to fear. I will send my book soon, with a letter, which I have had from George, who is with his family quite well. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 150. Letter 151 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats. Mortimer Terrace. Footnote: after the attack last mentioned, Keats went to be taken care of in Hunt's house, and stayed there till August 12th. End footnote. Wednesday, July 5th, 1820. My dear Fanny, I have had no return of the spitting of blood, and for 2 or 3 days have been getting a little stronger. I have no hopes of an entire re-establishment of my health under some months of patience. My physician tells me I must contrive to pass the winter in Italy. This is all very unfortunate for us. We have no recourse but patience, which I am now practicing better than ever I thought it possible for me. I have this moment received a letter from Mr. Brawne, dated Dunvegan Castle, Isle of Skye. He is very well in health and spirits. My new publication has been out for some days, and I have directed a copy to be bound for you, which you will receive shortly. No one can regret Mr. Hodgkinson's ill fortune. I must own, illness has not made such a saint of me as to prevent my rejoicing at his reverse. Keep yourself in as good hopes as possible. In case my illness should continue an unreasonable time, many of my friends would I trust, for my sake, to do all in their power to console and amuse you at the least word from me. You may depend upon it, that in case my strength returns, I will do all in my power to extricate you from the abbeys. Be above all things careful of your health, which is the cornerstone of all pleasure. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 151. Letter 152 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Benjamin Robert Haydon, Mortimer Terrace, July 1820. My dear Haydon, I am sorry to be obliged to try your patience a few more days, when you will have the book, Chapman's Homer, sent from town. I am glad to hear you are in progress with another picture. Go on. I am afraid I shall pop off just when my mind is able to run alone. Your sincere friend, John Keats. End of letter 152. Letter 153 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Mortimer Terrace, July 22nd, 1820. My dear Fanny, I have been gaining strength for some days. It would be well if I could at the same time say I am gaining hopes of a speedy recovery. My constitution has suffered very much for 2 or 3 years past, so as to be scarcely able to make head against illness, which the natural activity and impatience of my mind renders more dangerous. It will at all events be a very tedious affair, and you must expect to hear very little alteration of any sort in me for some time. You ought to have received a copy of my book 10 days ago. I shall send another message to the booksellers. One of Mr. Wiley's will be here today or tomorrow, when I will ask him to send you George's letter. Writing the smallest note is so annoying to me that I have waited till I shall see him. Mr. Hunt does everything in his power to make the time pass as agreeably with me as possible. I read the greatest part of the day, and generally take 2 half-hour walks a day up and down the terrace, which is very much pestered with cries, ballad singers, and street music. We have been so unfortunate for so long a time. Every event has been of so depressing a nature that I must persuade myself to think some change will take place in the aspect of our affairs. I shall be upon the lookout for a trump card. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 153. Letter 154 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, August 14th, 1820. My dear Fanny, 'tis a long time since I received your last. An accident of an unpleasant nature occurred at Mr. Hunt's, and prevented me from answering you. That is to say, made me nervous. That you may not suppose it worse, I will mention that someone of Mr. Hunt's household opened a letter of mine, upon which I immediately left Mortimer Terrace, with the intention of taking to Mrs. Bentley's again. Fortunately, I am not in so lone a situation, but am staying a short time with Mrs. Brawne, who lives in the house which was Mrs. Dilke's. I am excessively nervous. A person I am not quite used to entering the room half chokes me. 'Tis not yet consumption, I believe, but it would be were I to remain in this climate all the winter. So I am thinking of either voyaging or travelling to Italy. Yesterday I received an invitation from Mr. Shelley, a gentleman residing at Pisa, to spend the winter with him. If I go, I must be away in a month, or even less. I am glad you like the poems. You must hope with me that time and health will produce you some more. This is the first morning that I have been able to sit to the paper and have many letters to write, if I can manage them. God bless you, my dear sister. Your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 154. Letter 155 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Percy Bysshe Shelley, Wentworth Place, Hampstead, August 1820. My dear Shelley, I am very much gratified that you, in a foreign country, and with a mind almost overoccupied, should write to me in the strain of the letter beside me. If I do not take advantage of your invitation, it will be prevented by a circumstance I have very much at heart to prophesy. There is no doubt that an English winter would put an end to me, and do so in a lingering, hateful manner. Therefore I must either voyage or journey to Italy, as a soldier marches up to a battery. My nerves at present are the worst part of me, yet they feel soothed that, come what extreme may, I shall not be destined to remain in one spot long enough to take a hatred of any 4 particular bedposts. I am glad you take any pleasure in my poor poem, which I would willingly take the trouble to unwrite, if possible, did I care as much as I have done about reputation. I received a copy of the Cenci, as from yourself, from Hunt. There is only one part of it I am judge of, the poetry and dramatic effect, which, by many spirits nowadays, is considered the mammon. A modern work, it is said, must have a purpose, which may be the god. An artist must serve mammon, he must have self-concentration, selfishness, perhaps. You, I am sure, will forgive me for sincerely remarking that you might curb your magnanimity and be more of an artist and load every rift of your subject with ore. The thought of such discipline must fall like cold chains upon you, who perhaps never sat with your wings furled for 6 months together. And is not this extraordinary talk for the writer of Endymion, whose mind was like a pack of scattered cards? I am picked up and sorted to a pip. My imagination is a monastery, and I am its monk. I am in expectation of Prometheus every day. Could I have my own wish effected, you would have it still in manuscript, or be but now putting an end to the 2nd act. I remember you advising me not to publish my first blights on Hampstead Heath. I am returning advice upon your hands. Most of the poems in the volume I send you have been written above 2 years, and would never have been published but for hope of gain. So you see, I am inclined enough to take your advice now. I must express once more my deep sense of your kindness, adding my sincere thanks and respects for Mrs. Shelley. In the hope of soon seeing you, I remain most sincerely yours, John Keats. End of letter 155. Letter 156 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To John Taylor, Wentworth Place, August 14th, 1820. My dear Taylor, my chest is in such a nervous state that anything extra, such as speaking to an unaccustomed person or writing a note, half suffocates me. This journey to Italy wakes me at daylight every morning and haunts me horribly. I shall endeavor to go, though it be with the sensation of marching up against a battery. The first step towards it is to know the expense of a journey and a year's residence, which, if you will ascertain for me, and let me know early, you will greatly serve me. I have more to say, but must desist, for every line I write increases the tightness of my chest, and I have many more to do. I am convinced that this sort of thing does not continue for nothing. If you can come with any of our friends, do. Your sincere friend, John Keats. End of letter 156. Letter 157 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Benjamin Robert Haydon, Mrs. Brawne's, next door to Brown's, Wentworth Place, Hampstead, August 1820. My dear Haydon, I am much better this morning than I was when I wrote the note. That is, my hopes and spirits are better, which are generally at a very low ebb from such a protracted illness. I shall be here for a little time, and at home all and every day. A journey to Italy is recommended me, which I have resolved upon and am beginning to prepare for. Hoping to see you shortly. I remain your affectionate friend, John Keats. End of letter 157. Letter 158 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Brawne, Wentworth Place, August 1820. My dear Brawne, you may not have heard from blank or in any way that an attack of spitting of blood and all its weakening consequences has prevented me from writing for so long a time. I have matter now for a very long letter, but not news, so I must cut everything short. I shall make some confession, which you will be the only person, for many reasons, I shall trust with. A winter in England would, I have not a doubt, kill me, so I have resolved to go to Italy, either by sea or land. Not that I have any great hopes of that, for I think there is a core of disease in me not easy to pull out. I shall be obliged to set off in less than a month. Do not, my dear Brawne, tease yourself about me. You must fill up your time as well as you can, and as happily. You must think of my faults as lightly as you can. When I have health, I will bring up the long arrear of letters I owe you. My book has had good success among the literary people, and I believe has a moderate sale. I have seen very few people we know. Blank has visited me more than anyone. I would go to Blank and make some inquiries after you if I could with any bearable sensation, but a person I am not quite used to causes an impression on my chest. Last week I received a letter from Shelley, at Pisa, of a very kind nature, asking me to pass the winter with him. Hunt has behaved very kindly to me. You shall hear from me again shortly. Your affectionate friend, John Keats. End of letter 158. Letter 159 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Fanny Keats, Wentworth Place, Wednesday morning, August 23rd, 1820. My dear Fanny, it will give me great pleasure to see you here, if you can contrive it, though I confess I should have written instead of calling upon you before I set out on my journey, from the wish of avoiding unpleasant partings. Meantime, I will just notice some parts of your letter. The seal-breaking business is overblown. I think no more of it. A few days ago I wrote to Mr. Brawne asking him to befriend me with his company to Rome. His answer has not yet come, and I do not know when it will, not being certain how far he may be from the post office to which my communication is addressed. Let us hope he will go with me. George certainly ought to have written to you. His troubles, anxieties, and fatigues are not quite a sufficient excuse. In the course of time, you will be sure to find that this neglect is not forgetfulness. I am sorry to hear you have been so ill and in such low spirits. Now you are better. Keep so. Do not suffer your mind to dwell on unpleasant reflections. That sort of thing has been the destruction of my health. Nothing is so bad as want of health. It makes one envy scavengers and cinder-sifters. There are enough real distresses and evils in wait for everyone to try the most vigorous health. Not that I would say yours are not real, but they are such as to tempt you to employ your imagination on them, rather than endeavor to dismiss them entirely. Do not diet your mind with grief. It destroys the constitution. But let your chief care be of your health, and with that you will meet your share of pleasure in the world. Do not doubt it. If I return well from Italy, I will turn over a new leaf for you. I have been improving lately, and have very good hopes of turning a nuke and cheating the consumption. I am not well enough to write to George myself. Mr. Haslam will do it for me, to whom I shall write today, desiring him to mention as gently as possible your complaint. I am, my dear Fanny, your affectionate brother, John. End of letter 159. Letter 160 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Brawne, Wentworth Place, August 1820. My dear Brawne, I ought to be off at the end of this week, as the cold winds begin to blow towards evening, but I will wait till I have your answer to this. I am to be introduced, before I set out, to a Dr. Clarke, a physician settled at Rome, who promises to befriend me in every way there. The sale of my book is very slow, though it has been very highly rated. One of the causes, I understand from different quarters, of the unpopularity of this new book is the offence the ladies take at me. On thinking that matter over, I am certain that I have said nothing in a spirit to displease any woman I would care to please. But still, there is a tendency to class women in my books with roses and sweetmeats. They never see themselves dominant. I will say no more, but, waiting in anxiety for your answer, doff my hat and make a purse as long as I can. Your affectionate friend, John Keats. End of letter 160. Letter 161 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Brawne, Saturday, September 28th, 1820, Maria Crowther, off Yarmouth, Isle of Wight. My dear Brawne, the time is not yet come for a pleasant letter from me. I have delayed writing you from time to time, because I felt how impossible it was to enliven you with one heartening hope of my recovery. This morning in bed the matter struck me in a different manner. I thought I would write while I was in some liking, or I might become too ill to write at all. And then, if the desire to have written should become strong, it would be a great affliction to me. I have many more letters to write, and I bless my stars that I have begun, for time seems to press. This may be my best opportunity. We are in a calm, and I am easy enough this morning. If my spirits seem too low, you may in some degree impute it to our having been at sea a fortnight without making any way. I was very disappointed at not meeting you at Bedhampton, and am very provoked at the thought of you being at Chichester to-day. I should have delighted in setting off for London for the sensation merely. For what should I do there? I could not leave my lungs or stomach or other worse things behind me. I wish to write on subjects that will not agitate me much. There is one I must mention and have done with it. Even if my body would recover of itself, this would prevent it. The very thing which I want to live most for will be a great occasion of my death. I cannot help it. Who can help it? Were I in health, it would make me ill, and how can I bear it in my state? I dare say you will be able to guess on what subject I am harping. You know what was my greatest pain during the first part of my illness at your house. I wish for death every day and night to deliver me from these pains, and then I wish death away, for death would destroy even those pains which are better than nothing. Land and sea, weakness and decline, are great separators, but death is the great divorcer forever. When the pang of this thought has passed through my mind, I may say the bitterness of death is past. I often wish for you that you might flatter me with the best. I think, without my mentioning it, for my sake, you would be a friend to Miss Brawne when I am dead. You think she has many faults, but for my sake think she has not one. If there is anything you can do for her by word or deed, I know you will do it. I am in a state at present in which woman, merely as woman, can have no more power over me than stocks and stones, and yet the difference of my sensations with respect to Miss Brawne and my sister is amazing. The one seems to absorb the other to a degree incredible. I seldom think of my brother and sister in America. The thought of leaving Miss Brawne is beyond everything horrible. The sense of darkness coming over me, I eternally see her figure, eternally vanishing. Some of the phrases she was in the habit of using during my last nursing at Wentworth Place ring in my ears. Is there another life? Shall I awake and find all this a dream? There must be. We cannot be created for this sort of suffering. The receiving this letter is to be one of yours. I will say nothing about our friendship, or rather yours to me, more than that, as you deserve to escape, You will never be so unhappy as I am. I should think of you in my last moments. I shall endeavour to write to Miss Brawne, if possible, today. A sudden stop to my life in the middle of one of these letters would be no bad thing, for it keeps one in a sort of fever a while. Though fatigued with a letter longer than any I have written for a long while, it would be better to go on forever than to awake to a sense of contrary winds. We expect to put into Portland Roads tonight. The captain, the crew, and the passengers are all ill-tempered and weary. I shall write to Dilke. I feel as if I was closing my last letter to you. My dear Brawne, your affectionate friend, John Keats. End of letter 161. Letter 162 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Mrs. Brawne, October 4th, 1820, Naples Harbor. My dear Mrs. Brawne, a few words will tell you what sort of a passage we had, and what situation we are in, and few they must be on account of the quarantine, our letters being liable to be opened for the purpose of fumigation at the health office. We have to remain in the vessel 10 days, and are at present shut in a tier of ships. The sea air has been beneficial to me, about as great an extent as squally weather and bad accommodations and provisions has done harm. So I am about as I was. Give my love to Fanny, and tell her, if I were well, there is enough in this port of Naples to fill a quire of paper, but it looks like a dream. Every man who can row his boat and walk and talk seems a different being from myself. It has been unfortunate for me that one of the passengers is a young lady in a consumption. Her imprudence has vexed me very much. The knowledge of her complaints, the flushings in her face, all her bad symptoms have preyed upon me. They would have done so had I been in good health. Severn now is a very good fellow, but his nerves are too strong to be hurt by other people's illnesses. I remember poor Rice wore me in the same way to the Isle of Wight. I shall feel a load off me when the lady vanishes out of my sight. It is impossible to describe exactly in what state of health I am. At this moment I am suffering from indigestion very much, which makes such stuff of this letter. I would always wish you to think me a little worse than I really am. Of not being a sanguine disposition, I am likely to succeed. If I do not recover, your regret will be softened. If I do, your pleasure will be doubled. I dare not fix my mind upon Fanny. I have not dared to think of her. The only comfort I have had that way has been in thinking for hours together of having the knife she gave me put in a silver case, the hair and the locket, and the pocket-book in a gold net. Show her this. I dare say no more. Yet you must not believe I am so ill as this letter may look, for if ever there was a person born without the faculty of hoping, I am he. Severn is writing to Haslam, and I have just asked him to request Haslam to send you his account of my health. Oh, what an account I could give you of the Bay of Naples, if I could once more feel myself a citizen of this world. I feel a spirit in my brain would lay it forth pleasantly. Oh, what a misery it is to have an intellect in splints. My love again to Fanny. Tell Toots I wish I could pitch her a basket of grapes, and tell Sam the fellows catch here with the line a little fish much like an anchovy, pull them up fast. Remember me to Mr. and Mrs. Dilke. Mention to Browne that I wrote him a letter at Portsmouth, which I did not send, and am in doubt if he will ever see it. My dear Mrs. Brawne, yours sincerely and affectionate, John Keats. Goodbye, Fanny. God bless you. End of letter 162. Letter 163 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Browne, Naples, November 1st, 1820. My dear Browne, yesterday we were let out of quarantine, during which my health suffered more from bad air and the stifled cabin than it had done the whole voyage. The fresh air revived me a little, and I hope I am well enough this morning to write you a short, calm letter, if that can be called one, in which I am afraid to speak of what I would fainest dwell upon. As I have gone thus far into it, I must go on a little. Perhaps it may relieve the load of wretchedness which presses upon me. The persuasion that I shall see her no more will kill me. My dear Brawne, I should have had her when I was in health, and I should have remained well. I can bear to die. I cannot bear to leave her. Oh God, God, God! Everything I have in my trunks that reminds me of her goes through me like a spear. The silk lining she put in my travelling cap scalds my head. My imagination is horribly vivid about her. I see her. I hear her. There is nothing in the world of sufficient interest to divert me from her for a moment. This was the case when I was in England. I cannot recollect, without shuddering, the time that I was a prisoner at Hunt's, and used to keep my eyes fixed on Hampstead all day. Then there was a good hope of seeing her again. Now, oh, that I could be buried near where she lives! I am afraid to write to her, to receive a letter from her. To see her handwriting would break my heart. Even to hear of her anyhow, to see her name written, would be more than I can bear. My dear Brawne, what am I to do? Where can I look for consolation or ease? If I had any chance of recovery, this passion would kill me. Indeed, through the whole of my illness, both at your house and at Kentish Town, this fever has never ceased wearing me out. When you write to me, which you will do immediately, write to Rome, poste restante. If she is well and happy, put a mark thus, plus, if. Remember me to all. I will endeavour to bear my miseries patiently. A person in my state of health should not have such miseries to bear. Write a short note to my sister, saying you have heard from me. Severn is very well. If I were in better health, I would urge your coming to Rome. I fear there is no one can give me any comfort. Is there any news of George? Oh, that something fortunate had ever happened to me or my brothers. Then I might hope. But despair is forced upon me as a habit. My dear Brawne, for my sake be her advocate forever. I cannot say a word about Naples. I do not feel at all concerned in the 1,000 novelties around me. I am afraid to write to her. I should like her to know that I do not forget her. Oh, Brawne, I have coals of fire in my breast. It surprises me that the human heart is capable of containing and bearing so much misery. Was I born for this end? God bless her and her mother, and my sister, and George and his wife, and you, and all. Your ever affectionate friend, John Keats. Thursday, November 2nd. I was a day too early for the courier. He sets out now. I have been more calm today, though in a half dread of not continuing so. I said nothing of my health. I know nothing of it. You will hear Severn's account from Haslam. I must leave off. You bring my thoughts too near to Fanny. God bless you. End of letter 163. Letter 164 of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. To Charles Brawne. Rome, November 30th, 1820. My dear Brawne, 'tis the most difficult thing in the world to me to write a letter. My stomach continues so bad that I feel it worse on opening any book. Yet I am much better than I was in quarantine. Then I am afraid to encounter the proing and conning of anything interesting to me in England. I have an habitual feeling of my real life having passed, and that I am leading a posthumous existence. God knows how it would have been, but it appears to me. However, I will not speak of that subject. I must have been at Bedhampton nearly the time you were writing to me from Chichester. How unfortunate. And to pass on the river, too. There was my star predominant. I cannot answer anything in your letter, which followed me from Naples to Rome, because I am afraid to look it over again. I am so weak in mind that I cannot bear the sight of any handwriting of a friend I love so much as I do you. Yet I ride the little horse, and at my worst even in quarantine summoned up more puns in a sort of desperation in 1 week than in any year of my life. There is one thought enough to kill me. I have been well, healthy, alert, etc., walking with her, and now the knowledge of contrast, feeling for light and shade, all that information, primitive sense, necessary for a poem, are great enemies to the recovery of the stomach. There, you rogue, I put you to the torture, but you must bring your philosophy to bear, as I do mine, really, or how should I be able to live? Dr. Clark is very attentive to me. He says there is very little the matter with my lungs, but my stomach, he says, is very bad. I am well disappointed in hearing good news from George, for it runs in my head we shall all die young. I have not written to Reynolds yet, which he must think very neglectful. Being anxious to send him a good account of my health, I have delayed it from week to week. If I recover, I will do all in my power to correct the mistakes made during sickness, and if I should not, all my faults will be forgiven. Severn is very well, though he leads so dull a life with me. Remember me to all friends, and tell Haslam I should not have left London without taking leave of him, but from being so low in body and mind. Write to George as soon as you receive this, and tell him how I am, as far as you can guess, and also a note to my sister, who walks about my imagination like a ghost. She is so like Tom. I can scarcely bid you good-bye, even in a letter. I always made an awkward bow. God bless you. John Keats. Footnote. On the 10th of December following came a renewal of fever and hemorrhage, extinguishing the last hope of recovery, and after 11 more weeks of suffering, only alleviated by the devoted care of Severn, the poet died in his friend's arms on the 23rd of February, 1821. End footnote. End of letter 164. End of Letters of John Keats to his Family and Friends, edited by Sidney Colvin.